Chapter 72. In the mortal world, gold was the most beautiful and valuable thing, but the precious tree house dealt mostly with the cultivation practitioners, so they were used to the style of the cultivation circle. The most common currency in the cultivation circle wasn't gold or silver, but the rarer and more precious crystal stone. Jingjio knew about the crystal stone, but he hadn't had much contact with it. It was because the crystal stone was only useful for the cultivation practitioners below the undefeated state, and its effect was far inferior to the magic pills he usually took. As for Zhao Liu, Aoyama had provided her with a constant supply of magic pills since she was born, so she didn't have to worry about it. "Do you have it?" she asked Jingjio. Jingjio shook his head. The manager still had a smile on his face, but the expression in his eyes grew colder. Jingjio took out a magic pill from his sleeve and put it on the table. The magic pill had a dark red color. It didn't look special, but it had a pungent smell similar to mugwort when smelled carefully. The manager had been working in the precious tree house, so he was experienced and knowledgeable. He was startled for a moment, but his eyes brightened when he realized that it was what he wanted. He didn't have time to seal the box, so he found 2 teacups as quickly as he could and put the dark red magic pill into them, and then he wrapped it tightly with a thin cotton paper a few times. His expression relaxed a bit after he had done all this. The expression on Zhao Liu's face changed slightly. This magic pill should be the Xianxiao pill, not from Shuriwa Peak of Aoyama's sect, but from Xianhua Mountain in Zhongzhou. The manager looked at Zhao Liu and Jingjio with a more respectful expression. No matter where these weirdos came from, no matter if they were wanted in Chownan City, as long as they could take out a Xianxiao pill, they were qualified to be respected by the Precious Tree House. The manager led the 2 of them to a private room on the 7th floor, and left quietly after instructing them in a low voice about the matters to be paid attention to during the auction. This private room was one of the best in the Precious Tree House. Those regular cultivation sects wouldn't be arranged to have a room in this room unless they were the elders. Jingjio and Zhao Liu didn't know this. They pushed the door open and entered the room. They scanned the surroundings with their sword discernment. After confirming that there was no aura of the tactical formation and no one was spying on them, they untied the gray cloth. The furnishings in the private room could not be considered luxurious, but they were definitely exquisite. A pot of sparrow tongue tea was placed on the table, still giving off steam. It must have been freshly brewed when they left the first floor. Next to the teapot were a few plates of fruits and snacks, as well as hot and cold towels. 2 wooden tablets were placed on both sides of the table in silence. In terms of details, the Precious Tree House was indeed good. However, Jingjio and Zhao Liu were not satisfied with it, because it was Room B. After all, they had stayed in the Heavenly Room A in the Shangzhou Inn last night. "Why are we here?" Jingjio asked. Zhao Liu didn't hide here to evade the pursuit of the guards of Chownan City. She said, "The current manager of the Precious Tree House is Lei Poyan's grandnephew. It turned out that the backer of this place was Bihu Peak." And Jingjio asked. Zhao Liu thought, "Why do you still ask when you already know the answer?" Bihu Peak lost 2 Thunder Soul Woods, and Lei Poyan died due to going mad, which must have something to do with Senior Grandmaster's ascension. She said, "Even if he is dead, there will still be clues left behind. Lei Poyan wouldn't dare harm Senior Grandmaster alone, so he must have been lured by those big demons outside of Aoyama." The Precious Tree House is one of the channels of communication between Aoyama and the outside world, and the manager is his grandnephew. I think there must be something fishy here. Jingjio thought that the demons might not be the demons, and the people outside the mountain might be the ones inside the mountain. He asked again, "Why don't we find the manager directly?" Zhao Liu said, "Because he won't tell us, and he will even kill himself when he sees us. So we can only observe and see if we can find some clues." Jingjio felt it was a troublesome matter. He didn't think it was worth investigating. He had calculated and deduced for a whole year in a mountain village, and he had figured out many things, but he didn't have any evidence. There was no evidence for this kind of thing, only people. Lei Poyan's state was stagnant, and he wanted to regain his strength with that sword, so he was persuaded by that person. Since he had to ask, he might as well ask that person directly. Just like that summer night when he went to Behu Peak to ask White Ghost. The problem was how to find that person. He couldn't really go to all the hot pot restaurants in the world. But Jing Jiu believed that as long as that person found out that he was still alive, he would definitely come and find him. At that time, he could ask him directly why he did it. But he didn't know when that day would come. Would it be tomorrow? Or countless years later? Cultivators usually meditated at night, so the auctions of the Precious Tree House were always held during the day. However, there were no windows on the outer wall, so it looked like it was night. The auctioneer stood on the first floor, and his voice was accurately transmitted to every room through the sound-transmitting formation. The images of the items being auctioned would also be displayed in every room through the virtual mirror. The guests who came to the Precious Tree House for the first time were inevitably surprised, but Jing Jiu and Zhao Liu weren't interested at all. They had never attended an auction before, so they were curious about what would be auctioned. When they found that the items being auctioned were just some ordinary Shanjing and elixirs, they felt even more bored. Those who were willing to spend a lot of money to buy these should be ordinary rich businessmen or officials. For cultivators, these items were nothing special, but for them, they were the elixirs that could prolong their lives. In the 7th round of the auction, the Precious Tree House finally became lively. Jing Jiu and Zhao Liu still didn't care about it. The item being auctioned this round was a box of sedative ice tablets. The sedative ice tablets were produced in the North County, and there weren't many of them. Besides, most of them were controlled by the Northern Battlefront Army, which was hostile to the Windy Broadsword cult. Very few of them could be found in the cultivation world. When the guests were about to start bidding, an old and gentle voice rang out. "My fellow cultivators, we are the Dr. Monks from Machio. Today, I would like to ask for a favor. No one had expected to see the eminent monks of the Guochang Temple in such an ordinary auction." The sound of windows being opened was heard in the building, followed by countless greetings. Zhao Liu felt surprised. She walked to the window and looked down. She saw 2 monks, one old and one young, standing downstairs. Their monk robes were old and clean, not like those cultivation practitioners who exuded a natural and unworldly aura, but they gave off a feeling of stability and trustworthiness. After a while, the people attending the auction learned that the 2 doctor monks of the Guochang Temple were invited by the Aoyama sect to deal with the big demon in the Muddy River. Now the big demon had been killed, and the immortal masters of the Aoyama sect had gone back. However, the people who were frightened by the Dace devil hadn't fully recovered yet. The sedative ice tablet was a precious medicine that was needed to treat those people. The monks of the Guochang Temple had no choice but to ask for help, because it was known to the world that they were poor. Many voices were heard, scrambling to be the first to speak. "Don't worry, eminent monk. The Xiantian sect will not participate in the bidding for this item." "That's right. The Zaheo school also agrees." The manager of the auction house raised his hands, motioning for the guests to calm down. Then he turned to the old monk and said with a solemn expression, "You are a great monk. The Precious Tree House can't just stand by and do nothing. The owner and the owner have just passed on the message that the Precious Tree House will give this sedative icy pill to the Fruit Formation Temple." Hearing this, the people in the building applauded. Suddenly, a cold voice was heard, completely different from the current atmosphere. Chapter 73. The manager lifted his head to look at the source of the voice, and found it was coming from a room on the 8th floor. After a moment's thought, he knew which sect it belonged to. According to the rules of the Precious Tree House, he couldn't reveal the identity of the other party. "Why do you say so, my friend?" he asked with a faint smile. The gloomy voice said, "Don't talk too much. We must get the sedative icy pills. Let's start the auction now." The manager was slightly angry upon hearing this, but he forced himself to calm down and said mildly, "We are the same kind of people. Why do you have to be so aggressive?" The man sneered, "What's wrong with doing things according to the rules?" The manager narrowed his eyes slightly, wondering if this man was here to cause trouble. "You should know that this is Chaonan City," he said with a cold expression. "Of course I know it's Chaonan City." The man in the room on the 8th floor mocked. "Why don't you just tell us the name of the Aoyama sect? The manager retorted coldly. So what if I do? Do you dare disrespect the Aoyama sect? Of course not. But do you think the Aoyama sect will care about you now? I'd like to know where your precious treehouse gets its confidence to be so arrogant. The man sneered. The manager's expression changed upon hearing this, finally understanding why the other party dared to be so arrogant. 2 years ago, the Bihu Peak of Aoyama experienced a great change. The precious tree house lost its most powerful backer. But how did this man know about it? Speaking of arrogance, we are no match for your sect of 3. You came to our Nanhazu and dared to compete with the Guoqing Temple for something. The manager didn't care about the rules anymore, sneered and pointed out the other party's background. If the people of the sect of 3 still insisted on getting the sedative icy pills, he would let them go against the Guoqing Temple. Hearing the name of the sect of 3, a discussion broke out in the building. The 3 Capitals sect was a Western sword sect. It was not very famous, but because it was a vassal of the Kunlun sect, no one dared to provoke it. The window of the room was pushed open, and a middle-aged man with a cold expression stood in front of the window. He looked at the steward downstairs and sneered. He then looked at the old monk from the Guoqing Temple and said, "Master, it's not that our sect wants to go against your temple. It's just that our sect's young master is seriously ill and needs to be treated with sedative ice tablets. We really can't let him have it." This middle-aged man wasn't polite to the precious tree house, but he was very respectful to the Guoqing Temple. Hearing this, many people were puzzled. The sedative icy pills weren't really a rare magic drug, but the Guoqing Temple came to the aid of the Dace Devil in Chownan City, which frightened the populace and made them sick. The All Three sect was a vassal of the Kunlun sect, and the Kunlun sect had a close relationship with the Northern Magic Army. If the son of the All Three sect was seriously ill, how could he not have gotten the medicine? The middle-aged man knew what the crowd was thinking, saying, "Our young master came to Nanhaza to have fun, but unfortunately, in Een City, he was poisoned by the flower." The uproar broke out again. It seemed that everyone knew the origin of the flower poison. If it was really done by that cruel and merciless female practitioner, then the young master of the 3 Capitals sect was indeed pitiful. The flower poison wouldn't kill the victim, but it would make the victim feel unbearably itchy and uncomfortable. However, if the victim had the willpower, he would recover after suffering for 10 days. The problem was, how could the people of the 3 Capitals sect let their young master suffer such inhumane torture? We must take the sedative icy pills with us. As for those mortals in Chownan City, they're just unlucky. The middle-aged man said. Hearing this, there were no objections in the building. It was necessary to have a benevolent heart, but in the eyes of the cultivation practitioners, the mortals' lives were nothing, especially when they were being compared to themselves. The old monk of the Guoqing Temple didn't agree with this statement, but he wasn't good with words, so he just shook his head and sighed. In a room on the 7th floor, Zhao Lei didn't understand, asking, "Why is such a small sect not afraid of the Guoqing Temple?" "The monks have a good temper," said Jingjiao. This was the style of the Guoqing Temple, or in other words, the reputation of the Guoqing Temple in the cultivation circle over the years. Of course, this was only true in Chownan City and the inner lands of the empire. In the north, who would dare disrespect the Guoqing Temple? If the sect of 3 dared to compete with the Guoqing Temple for the medicine, they would be torn to pieces by the angry populace, and the windy broadsword church wouldn't let it go easily. They might even go to Kunlun. Though the cultivation practitioners in the building agreed with the middle-aged man of the 3 Capitals sect, they were still in Chownan City, and the highly achieved monks of the Guoqing Temple needed the medicine to treat the patients. They wouldn't let a swordsman from the west take away the medicine so easily. There were many bids at the beginning of the auction, and soon the price of the sedative icy pills exceeded its original value. The sect of 3 didn't show any weakness. They would continue to bid no matter what price was offered. There were many crystal mines on the Kunlun Mountain. Though the sect of 3 wasn't as rich as the Kunlun sect, they still had a lot of crystals. As time went by, the price of the sedative icy pills rose higher and higher, and those sects had no choice but to withdraw. Even if they wanted to use the sedative icy pills to protect the Guocheng Temple, they had to consider the current price. As the sedative icy pills were about to go to the sect of 3, the manager suddenly said something with a big smile on his face. Mysterious Room B offers a Xian Chao pill. Hearing this, the building was quiet at first, and then there was an uproar. The Xian Chao pill was a famous item on the Xianhua mountain in the center state. It was said that it could only be made by the small bronze stove. Regardless of its efficacy or value, the Xian Chao pill was more than 100 times more valuable than the sedative icy pills. Why was the person in that room willing to pay a Xian Chao pill to buy the sedative icy pills? Did they also want to build a relationship with the highly achieved monks of the Guocheng Temple? However, this price was a little too high. The people of the sect of 3 were also shocked. They looked at each other speechlessly, not knowing what to do next. The middle-aged man sneered, motioning for them not to raise the price. He sat back down, thinking about something. No one had expected that the sedative icy pills would be sold this way. Unexpectedly, the window of the room on the 7th floor was still closed. It seemed that the man had no intention of meeting the monks of the Guocheng Temple. The manager who presided over the auction personally sent the sedative icy pills to Mysterious Room B. He lowered his head very carefully and didn't look at Jing Jiao and Zhao Leiyu. Jing Jiao and Zhao Leiyu got up and prepared to leave. The manager respectfully handed over a small wooden box with both hands. Jing Jiao took the wooden box and opened it. Zhao Leiyu took a look and found that it was the Xian Chao pill. She thought for a moment and understood the meaning of the precious tree house. She was quite satisfied. The manager reminded them again in a low voice, suggesting that they could sit for a while and wait for the owner to come to meet them. Jing Jiao and Zhao Leiyu knew what he meant, but they ignored it. This auction was really a bit boring. They obviously couldn't find any clues, so what was the point of staying here? Looking at the two figures walking down the stairs, the manager thought to himself, where did these strange people come from? I have to inform the owner quickly. Today was originally a play arranged by the Precious Tree House. When they knew that the doctor monks of the Guocheng Temple needed the sedative icy pills, the general content of the play was decided. They wanted to use this to gain some good reputation for the Precious Tree House and to explain to the immortal master who would come to Aoyama in a few days. They didn't expect that the Three-Do sect would suddenly jump out and almost put on a different play. The manager thought that the two people didn't pass the ice pills to the doctor monks of the Guocheng Temple through him. Did they plan to find them in private? Not far from the Precious Tree House, Jing Jiao and Zhao Leiyu were stopped by the people of the Three-Do sect. Jing Jiao hadn't encountered such a thing for many years, and Zhao Leiyu had only read such stories in books. She felt that it was boring and uninteresting. She looked at them and asked seriously, "Do you want to die?" Chapter 74. Looking at these two strange men with their faces covered with gray cloths, the middle-aged man's expression changed slightly, and he sent out his spiritual awareness to check them out. He found that the taller one was an ordinary person, and he couldn't judge the cultivation state of the woman who had spoken earlier. But judging from her young voice, how high could her cultivation state be? They are merely scoundrels who don't dare show their faces. A disciple of the sect of 3 said, "I'm afraid the city guard sent out a warning this morning to arrest you too." Seeing the reactions of Jing Jiao and Zhao Leiyu, the middle-aged man was even more certain that his speculation was correct. He felt a bit relieved, and then his murderous intent arose. In a place like Chaonan City, even the cultivation practitioners couldn't kill people at will. But if the person killed was not someone who could see the light of day, who would care? The middle-aged man gave up the idea of asking for the medicine and said to Jing Jiao and Zhao Leiyu with a smile, "Your biggest mistake was giving the medicine to those two monks in the Precious Tree House." Then he told the disciples in a serious tone, "Kill them, but don't ruin the medicine." A few flying swords rose up in the air, heading toward the other end of the narrow alley, aiming at Zhao Leiyu. As the flying sword arrived in front of her, they suddenly produced a few residual shadows, like blooming flowers, and it was hard to tell which sword was the real one. This was the three-flower sword style of the sect of 3, famous for its unpredictability. If the regular cultivation practitioners were not prepared, they would be hit by the swords as soon as they faced them. Zhao Liu waved her hand, and the thoughtless sword came out, flying around her body at a high speed. It was impossible to see the body of the sword clearly, only a patch of red lines. Following a few crisp sounds, the flying sword were broken into pieces, dropping to the ground with crisp, clanking sounds. The flying swords of the disciples of the Sect of Three were destroyed, and their sword hearts were severely damaged. They couldn't hold on any longer, spitting out a mouthful of blood and falling to the ground. The thoughtless sword hovered in front of Zhao Liu in silence. She didn't even try to tell which sword shadow was the real one, and simply chopped them all down. Sensing the energy from the red flying sword, the middle-aged man's face turned pale, and he was extremely shocked. He had never felt this kind of energy, even from the flying sword of the sect master. Was this the legendary divine weapon? Who were they? Zhao Liu glanced at Jingjiu. At this time, they were less than 10 zhang away from the Three Capital Sect. Within this distance, those in the state of inherited will could also control their swords to attack their opponents. Jingjiu said, I haven't killed anyone for many years. Zhao Liu asked, what were you doing when we first met? Jingjiu knew that she wasn't talking about the time he jumped in front of her, but the time after that. At that time, he had just beheaded Zui Yi of Bihu Peak. During their brief conversation, the middle-aged man from the Three Capitals sect finally came to his senses. He summoned his flying sword and prepared to escape. After confirming that Jingjiu had no intention of drawing his sword, Zhao Liu shook her head and pointed at the sky with her right hand. The thoughtless sword pierced through the air. A streak of bright red sword light illuminated the green trees on the side of the alley. The middle-aged man fell from the sky and landed heavily in the alley. His head was separated from his body, and a large pool of blood splashed out. The bright red sword light turned around again and arrived in front of Zhao Liu like a flash of lightning. With a series of cracking noises, the disciples of the Three Capitals sect, who were spurting blood in pain, could no longer feel any pain because their heads had also fallen off their bodies. Zhao Liu walked up to those corpses and scanned them with her piercing discernment. Then, she squatted down and searched the corpses. Seeing this, Jingjiu was quite appreciative, thinking that this young girl was much stronger than he was when he was young. The sword fire left the thoughtless sword and fell on those mutilated corpses, burning them to ashes in an instant. Jingjiu suddenly wondered what his fellow disciples in Aoyama, who regarded Zhao Liu as a fairy, would think if they saw this scene. Zhao Liu seemed to know what he was thinking. What others think has nothing to do with me, she said. Jingjiu didn't continue on this topic, but said, the sword fire can't completely erase the traces. The ashes of the corpses were still there, and there were many ways to find clues in the cultivation circle, such as the bloodstains on the walls. Some sects were good at the two worlds connection, and they could even use the magic methods to deduce the initial scene from the traces left behind. Shuiyu Nunnery was an expert in this field. Zhao Liu said, I didn't intend to destroy the corpses, but I was thinking that with so many corpses in the alley, what if I scared the little kids who passed by? Killing people without blinking an eye could be considered cruel, but she didn't forget these details. Did it mean that she truly loved this world? Jingjiu thought she was similar to his big brother when he was young and asked reflexively, are there any famous hot pot restaurants in Chaonan City? Speaking of hot pot, the most famous restaurants were all in Izhou. There were also hot pot restaurants in the north, but the taste was quite different from the spicy ones in Izhou. The hot pot was seasoned with sesame sauce, like the one in Jiaoga City. However, for the residents of Chaonan City, the best hot pot restaurant was the Hongmao restaurant. The style of the Hongmao restaurant was more northerly, so there was no fried, crispy meat. Zhao Liu wasn't happy about it, so she ordered 7 plates of fresh-cut mutton, her favorite dish since she was little. Jingjiu only cooked a few pieces of green vegetables to eat. The soup here was white soup, which suited his taste. Not far from the Hongmao restaurant, there was an inconspicuous earthen temple in a remote street. The two monk doctors from the Guoqing temple had lived here for a long time. The old monk was staring at a box in his hand in a daze. He didn't need to open the box, as he could tell by its smell that it contained the sedative icy pills that he needed the most. Thinking of the sword light that had just brought the box into the temple, the young monk felt a chill run down his spine. "Senior Master, should we inform the local authorities?" he asked. The old monk shook his head, saying, "We're the same kind of people." The young monk was startled, and he came back to his senses after a while. "Are you from the Aoyama sect?" he asked uncertainly. The old monk nodded. Thinking of what had happened in the Precious Tree House, the young monk thought that it was no wonder that the person in the room on the 7th floor could take out a xianxiao pill so easily. Chownan City is so close to Aoyama, but that sect of 3 dares to act so arrogantly, he said happily. The old monk had figured out who the person was from the sword light. He couldn't help but shake his head when he heard what his senior nephew said, thinking that the Aoyama sect had always kept a low profile, so what he said was wrong. "I wonder how Lu Shui is doing." The young monk thought of the scene where he fought side by side with the disciples of the Aoyama sect in the Muddy River a few days ago, and said sentimentally, "Though he is young, he is indeed someone with natural Tao quality, much stronger than me. Moreover, he was able to remain so calm when facing that demon, which is really admirable." The old monk said calmly, "Calmness usually comes from courage. Cultivationists of the Aoyama sect don't lack this." The young monk asked worriedly, "Why did he pass out in the end?" "I haven't found out where his injury came from, even though I've investigated for a long time." There was a sudden noise outside the temple. Chapter 75. The young monk recognized this person, knowing that he was a master of the Pure Heaven Bureau stationed in Chownan City. He stood up and pressed his palms together in greeting. This middle-aged man was Shi Fengchun, an important figure in the Pure Heaven Bureau. He was in charge of the affairs related to the cultivation world in Chownan City. Shi Fengchun returned the greeting to the young monk, and then turned to the old monk, saying respectfully, "Greetings, Master." Most of the officials of the Pure Heaven Bureau were cultivation practitioners or had a cultivation background, and Shi Fengchun was no exception. According to the seniority in the sect, he should address this old monk as Marshal Granduncle. However, he was an official after all, so it was rather inconvenient for him to address the other party as master. The old monk said warmly, "I wonder what business Lordshire has come here for." Shi Fengchun said with a bitter smile, "I'd like to inform you that 2 incidents have happened in Chownan City today. One is the intrusion of the city gate, and the other is the murder. Both were done by cultivation practitioners." Puzzled, the old monk asked, "Does this have something to do with us?" The door of the temple was closed, so the conversation could not be heard by others. Shi Fengchun said directly, "The people of the sect of 3 are dead." The young monk was shocked and looked at the old monk. Shi Fengchun continued, "They are the ones who wanted the sedative icy pills in the Precious Tree House." A look of pity appeared on the old monk's face as he said, "Where are the bodies of our fellow cultivators? This old monk wishes to recite the reincarnation scripture to send you off." Shi Fengchun said with a bitter smile, "The corpses have all been burned to ashes. The murderer is very cruel." The old monk said, "Are you suspecting me and Marshal Nephew? What are you talking about?" Shi Fengchun pretended to be displeased and said, "Who in the world dares to doubt the Vedanta of the Guoqing temple?" The young monk thought to himself, if it wasn't for the matter of the sedative icy flakes and the deaths of the people of the 3 capitals sect, why would you come looking for us? In the end, the sedative ice tablets were obtained by the 2 people in the mysterious room B. Shi Fengchun looked at the young monk and asked sincerely, "Little master, do you know the background of those 2? The young monk's expression turned solemn. Thinking of the killing intent hidden in the sword light that delivered the medicine into the temple, he had already guessed the truth of the matter. At that moment, the old monk suddenly said, "Are there 2 people?" "That's right." The 2 of them were masked with gray cloths. Even a manager of the Precious Tree House couldn't see their faces. Still looking at the young monk, Shi Fengchun said with a smile, "I wonder if the young master has seen them." By now, The young monk had already determined that the person who delivered the medicine to the killer was a fellow Taoist from Aoyama's sect. Of course, he was not willing to say it. But as a monk, I can't say, the old monk suddenly said. Shi Fengshan was startled, wondering if this was a trick. The young monk swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth and looked at his uncle master uneasily. He suddenly realized that the box containing the sedative icy tablets had disappeared. He didn't know where martial uncle had hidden it. It's a sin. The old monk glanced at the young monk and then turned to Shi Fengshan, saying, "My martial nephew is practicing the silent meditation." Shi Fengshan pretended to be enlightened. "We really don't know who those two people are." The old monk said, "I'm sorry, I can't provide you with any clues." Shi Fengshan let out a bitter smile. He knew there was a problem, but he didn't dare ask further. He bowed deeply to the ground and walked out of the temple gate. As the noises outside the temple died down, the young monk let out a sigh of relief and sat down on the ground. The old monk sighed, "I hope this matter won't bring you any trouble." The young monk wanted to say something, but he remembered what his senior master had instructed him to do, so he closed his mouth and mumbled anxiously. The old monk understood what he meant, saying, "You should practice the silent meditation first. We'll talk about it when we leave Chownan City." It was late at night. The Hongmao house was closed. In the heavenly room A of an inn not far away, Zhao Liu sat cross-legged on the ground, meditating and recuperating. The thoughtless sword hovered above her head, rotating slowly. Jing Jiu had already arrived outside Chownan City, walking to the middle section of the heavenly bridge, which was also the highest part of the bridge. The starlight illuminated the river. The torrential flow of the river didn't slow down, making it look even more dangerous. Jing Jiu retrieved his piercing discernment and jumped into the river, creating a splash on the surface of the river, but soon disappearing without attracting any attention. The river was extremely muddy, and it was late at night, so nothing could be seen, but it couldn't block Jing Jiu's vision. After swimming in the rapid and cold water for a long time, Jing Jiu came to a remote corner in the deep end of the broken cliff in the middle of the river. The river here had become much smoother, but the pressure was still great, and it was extremely cold. Even a swordsman of the undefeated state couldn't stay here for too long. If it weren't for his special body, he wouldn't have been able to dive to such a deep place and find the Dace Devil. The Dace Devil was dead. The Dace Devil was huge, its body as high as a 3-story building, its front feet like fins, its skin smooth and gloomy. It was embedded in the deep end of the broken cliff, blending in with the surroundings like a common rock. It was indeed hard to find. That was why the disciples of the Aoyama sect couldn't find the corpse. Jing Jiu drifted to the front of the Dace Devil and found that its neck and head were full of sword wounds. Its eyes were closed, and the green bloodstains were not washed away by the river. It seemed that the wounds were caused by the flying swords of the disciples of the Aoyama sect, and the wounds on its eyes seemed to be caused by some kind of magic method. It's indeed being fed by someone. Jing Jiu's gaze fell on the 2 iron chains, thinking in silence. The 2 iron chains bound the back half of the Dace Devil tightly, and the other end should be in the deep end of the cliff cave. Swimming in the dark river, Jing Jiu circled the huge body of the Dace Devil, but he didn't find anything except for the sword wounds. He untied the iron sword and thrust it toward the head of the Dace Devil. Unexpectedly, the tip of the sword slipped and deviated from its target. It was indeed a legendary demon that came from the abyss and swam across the West Ocean. Even though it was dead, its skin was still as hard as steel, which couldn't be cut by an ordinary flying sword. Jing Jiu's iron sword came from Immortal Master Mo of Shuriwa Peak. Though it wasn't a famous sword, it was still extraordinary, but it wasn't sharp enough. The dark river water was vibrating slightly. If someone could listen underwater, they would be able to hear the buzzing of bees, which was the trembling of the silver bracelet on Jing Jiu's wrist. Jing Jiu didn't pay any attention to it. He drifted to the front of the Dace Devil and put his right hand down. A straight and clear crack appeared on the tough skin of the Dace Devil, and then the crack became wider and wider until the inner membrane and cartilage could be seen. Huh. Jingjiu tore open the cartilage on the top of the Dace Devil's head with both hands. Looking at the empty pill chamber above the Dace Devil's head, Jingjiu thought that the devil pill was indeed gone. Chapter 76. Jingjiu came to the shore, the river water flowing down his white cloth like a waterfall. The soldiers on the city wall of Chaonan were running, not knowing what had happened. Jingjiu glanced in that direction and used his sword source to evaporate the water on his body, his whole body enshrouded in a layer of white fog. Are you still asking me why I came to Chaoyang City? Zhao Leiyu's voice rang out outside the fog. Jingjiu now knew why the soldiers in Chaonan City were so nervous. It must be because she had alarmed many people when she rode her sword out of the city. He didn't answer her question because she was right. What had happened to Lu Shui was all within his expectation, but he still had to come and have a look before he could feel at ease. Zhao Leiyu asked, "Have you found what you were looking for?" Jingjiu uttered, Zhao Leiyu didn't ask anything else. Jingjiu looked at her and asked, "Do you still want to investigate further?" Zhao Leiyu uttered him as well. "This matter has nothing to do with the Thunder Soul Wood." Jingjiu continued while looking at her. If the ascension failed, the only reason was that there was something wrong with the formation. Zhao Leiyu said, Lei Poyan dared to steal the Thunder Soul Wood from Bihu Peak, so he dared to tamper with the materials of the formation. These two matters had nothing to do with each other, but this inference was indeed reasonable. Jingjiu said, the formation was on the top of Shinma Peak, so he couldn't tamper with it. Zhao Leiyu thought that she didn't see any trace of the formation on the peak top, not even a trace of residual energy. Dispersing smoke and clouds is the name of that formation. Jingjiu said, it won't leave any trace. Zhao Leiyu said, dispersing smoke and clouds. This name is really inauspicious. Jingjiu said, the ascension of the cultivation practitioners means death to those who stay in this world, so it's not a happy thing to begin with. Zhao Leiyu said after a moment of silence, no wonder few people in the 9 peaks of Aoyama are happy about the ascension of Senior Grandmaster. Jingjiu said nothing. Zhao Leiyu said, if there's nothing wrong with the materials, how could there be a problem with the formation? Maybe the formation that perfected Jingyang learned back then was wrong. Jingjiu said with a smile. His smile was a bit faint. Jingjiu and Zhao Leiyu left Chaonan City and traveled through the mountains, their whereabouts unknown. On the other side of Aoyama, Lu Shui had finally woken up. His burning skin had returned to its normal temperature. His mind was not affected, and there seemed to be no changes. No one knew that when he looked at himself in the bronze mirror, he could occasionally see a hint of red in the deepest part of his pupils. On the second day, Lu Shui was imprisoned in the sword jail. No matter how angry Elder Bai Rujing was, he couldn't change the decision of Shanghai to Peak. It was because Shanghai to Peak suspected that Lu Shui had secretly swallowed the devil pill of the Dace Devil during the demon-slaying battle at the Muddy River. Swallowing the devil pill could help the cultivation practitioners improve their cultivation state quickly, but it could also contaminate their Dao heart and cause them to go mad. For the orthodox cultivation sects, this was an unacceptable behavior, and for the Aoyama sect, it was a serious offense against the sword justice. Even though Lu Shui was someone with natural Dao quality who was highly regarded by the sect, the lightest punishment would be to destroy his cultivation state and expel him from Aoyama if he had done such a thing. In the following days, Shanghai to Peak interrogated Lu Shui severely and even tortured him in the end. The result of the interrogation was a bit unexpected. By the Muddy River, Lu Shui suddenly fell unconscious. His body was burning hot, and his Dao meridians were all abnormal phenomena, indicating that he had indeed swallowed the devil pill. However, neither the masters of Shuriwei Peak nor Qi Yan's sword heart listening pulse could find any direct evidence in his body. Normally, since there was no evidence, Jingjiu should be released. However, the incident was so strange that Shanghai to Peak wouldn't close the case. Yuan Qijing gave the order to keep Lu Shui locked up in the sword jail, and forbade anyone from visiting him. By now, both Elder Bai Rujing and those young disciples of Liangwang Peak believed the judgment of Shanghai to Peak. As such, nobody went to visit Lu Shui. No matter how hard Shanghai to Peak tortured Lu Shui, he kept silent. He didn't even curse, no matter how much pain he was in. Silence. He sat in the cell without any sunlight, his scarred face full of stubbornness, but he looked so lonely. The 9 peaks of Aoyama were shocked. By the stream of sword washing, discussions about this could often be heard. Some were doubtful, some were sympathetic, but most of them were indifferent and contemptuous. The indifference and contemptuous came from their disappointment in Lu Shui. Since he was highly valued by the sect, there was no need for him to be so anxious that his Tao heart was disturbed. Gu Qing was practicing sword work in Shenma Peak, so the news came a bit late. By the time he learned about the incident, Lu Shui had been locked up for more than 10 days. He thought this incident was suspicious because he had met Lu Shui a few times, and he didn't believe that Lu Shui would steal and eat the devil pill. If Lu Shui continued to be locked up in the gloomy sword jail, his cultivation would suffer a great setback, or even be cut off from the beginning. Yet he was only an inherited sword disciple living in Shenma Peak. How could he help Lu Shui? At this moment, he remembered what Jing Jiao told him before he left. If anything happens, look for the monkey. Gu Qing was a smart guy, and he had already figured out the meaning of this sentence. In many people's eyes, Jing Jiao and Lu Shui had drifted apart. Only Gu Qing knew the real relationship between Jing Jiao and Lu Shui. For example, those bamboos and those instructions. He was sure that for Jing Jiao, only Lu Shui's matters mattered in the 9 peaks of Aoyama. So the meaning of this sentence was, if anything happens to Lu Shui, look for the monkey. Gu Qing walked to the outside of the wooden hut, punched the tree trunk a few times, and then let out 2 wu sounds. The sound of twigs and leaves bending could be heard in the forest, along with the cries of the monkeys. More than a dozen monkeys came to the wooden hut and surrounded him. Gu Qing could imitate the monkeys' cries, but it didn't mean that he could explain this matter with these cries. Looking at the apes, he told them the whole story in a slow and accurate voice. The monkeys were so anxious that they scratched their ears and cheeks, pointing at him and screaming. Gu Qing knew that they were scolding him, so he spread his hands innocently, thinking, what can I do? A little monkey climbed into the wooden hut from the window, grabbed a piece of paper, and kept waving it in the air. Gu Qing patted his forehead, thinking, how could I be so stupid? The monkeys spread their arms innocently, thinking, you still know? After grinding the ink and spreading out the white paper, Gu Qing was in a dilemma as to what to write, because he didn't know who the letter would be sent to later. After thinking for a while, he finally wrote a few simple sentences, and he didn't forget to hold the pen in his left hand. I don't know who you are. Anyway, please help Lu Shui. The next day, Lu Shui was released. Both the ordinary disciples by the stream of sword washing and the people in the 9 peaks were surprised. Shanghai Peak didn't give any explanation. No one wanted to pick up Lu Shui. When Lu Shui returned to Tianguang Peak, he didn't see his master, Bai Rujing. He was greeted by countless strange eyes. Late at night, Guhan came. For the righteousness of the world, some sacrifices are worth it. Guhan put his hand on his shoulder and comforted him. First brother wanted to come in person, but he was worried that others would see it. Lu Shui asked, why did Shanghai Peak let me go? It was much earlier than planned. Guhan said, of course it was master's order. Thinking that this was arranged by the sect master himself, Lu Shui felt the burden on his shoulder getting heavier. After Guhan left, he sat in front of the window, looking at the oil lamp for a long time. Chapter 77. Time flew by, and 2 years had passed. The world was still the same, without much change. It was quiet in the underworld, and the soul fires hadn't been seen under the sunlight for a long time. The snowy kingdom was also quiet. It seemed that even the brutal and bloodthirsty ice monsters needed a break after so many battles. The soldiers and civilians of North County and the man guarding the wind and snow by himself finally had a year without any wars. Nothing serious happened overseas. It was said that a godly ship from Punglai Island encountered the chaotic wind and sank when it was exploring the secret realm of Singing Spring, one of the 3 huge whirlpools. Though the ship luckily escaped from the huge whirlpool, it collided with an iceberg. If a hero from the alien land hadn't crossed the ocean to rescue the ship, the godly ship would have sunk to the bottom of the cold ocean. After this story was spread to Chaotian, many people dismissed it as a ridiculous lie. It was because nobody could understand the details of the story except for those cultivation swordsmen above the Broken Sea state, such as what it meant when the hero crossed the ocean and how could a person rescue the divine boat that was as heavy as a mountain and a river. This was a common occurrence, as people only believed what they wanted to believe. Even now, some mortals still insisted that the cultivation practitioners didn't exist in the world for the same reason. No matter whether people believed it or not, some things would happen eventually. For instance, Haizhou City was about to welcome another Four Seas banquet hosted by Shiwang Sunday. At the same time, a meeting was being held in a secret office in the city. This year's winter was coming to an end, and it didn't snow in Zhaoga City anymore. Haizhou was located by the West Ocean, with a warm climate that was as intoxicating as spring. Looking at the indifferent faces of those cultivation practitioners, Shi Fengshen suddenly felt like getting drunk and not thinking about these things anymore. However, he hadn't drunk alcohol for 2 years after he was transferred. He was fully aware that if the Four Seas banquet wasn't going to be held in Haizhou City, the Pure Heaven Bureau and himself wouldn't be able to invite so many cultivation practitioners, not to mention the disciples of the major sections. I've been promoted for 2 years. Shi Fengshan said this while looking at the cultivation practitioners, but his face didn't show any happiness. Apart from 2 cultivation practitioners of small sects who didn't know the inside story congratulated him, the other cultivation practitioners didn't respond. The cultivation practitioners respected the imperial court, but they didn't care about the officials of the imperial court, even though Shi Fengshan was not a regular official. Moreover, Shi Fengshan was promoted from the supervisor of Chaonan City to the deputy inspector of the Pure Heaven Bureau. Though it seemed like a promotion, many people knew the reason. As the deputy inspector, I'm responsible for investigating this case. If I can't catch those 2 demons this time, I'm finished. Shi Fengshan's eyes swept across the crowd, saying, I indeed don't have much influence on your sects, but if I'm sure I'm doomed, I'll try my best to influence the imperial court's quota distribution. Hearing this, the cultivators from a major sects like the Great Lakes sect remained calm, but the cultivators from the smaller sects were a little anxious. The distribution of crystals and other cultivation resources was decided by the imperial court, the Center sect, the Green Mountain sect, the Great Marsh, the West Ocean, and other major cultivation sections. The crystal stones and other cultivation resources were distributed by the imperial court, Zhongzhou School, Aoyama sect, Ozawa, West Ocean, and other major sections. If Shi Fengshan wanted to make a big fuss before he stepped down, even if he only reduced the crystal stone supply by 10%, it would have a great impact on these small sections, a cultivation practitioner of small sects said with a bitter expression. Master, if you have any orders, just tell us directly. There's no need to do this. Shi Fengshan said, my intention is very clear. The swordsmen of the imperial court are either guarding the center of Zhaoga City or fighting against the swordsmen of the Snowy Kingdom in the Northern Army. Now the Pure Heaven Bureau is only an empty shell. We can't do anything to those 2 demons, so we have no choice but to ask for your help. The cultivation practitioner asked in surprise, what are the origins of those 2 demons? Nobody knows. Shi Fengshan waved his hand, and a green light fell on the wall like a piece of white paper, on which appeared a dozen lines of words. The first one was in Shangzhou, where the 2 demonic swordsmen killed 4 people. After the investigation, they didn't even meet the 4 people, so they must have committed the murders randomly. Then, in Chaonan City, they killed 4 disciples of the sect of 3 and left some clues. Shi Fengshan continued. In the next 2 years, These two demons committed crimes one after another, killing more than 70 people in total, including innocent civilians and cultivation practitioners. Most of the murders were done without a reason, like the first time they committed the murders, seeming to be done randomly. This shows how cruel they are. Many people noticed the case in Chownan City and instinctively looked at an old man sitting in the middle of the room. That old man had white hair and a profound energy. He was the elder of the Kunlun sect, Hijichong. The Kunlun sect, which had never participated in the Four Seas banquet, unexpectedly sent an elder here. It must have something to do with the case in Chownan City. Hijichong didn't say anything. The sect of three was a vassal of the Kunlun sect. If only a few low-level disciples had been killed, he wouldn't have shown up. However, the young master of the sect of three had suffered a lot because of this incident, and because of the grudge, he persuaded the sect master of the sect of three to ask for help from Kunlun. So Hijichong had to come. Someone asked, "What is the state of those two demons?" Shi Fengshan said, "In the early autumn of last year, the headmaster of the Black Dragon Temple, Master Zhu Gui, was killed by a demon across the Aoyama. I'm afraid his opponent is already in the middle state of the undefeated." Hearing this, the expressions on the faces of the crowd varied. The headmaster of the Black Dragon Temple, Zhu Gui, had a terrible reputation. He had cheated many wealthy merchants out of their money, even the money for the treatment of the poor. There was also a rumor that he had sexually abused women in private, committing all kinds of evil deeds. However, this master was an old friend of a royal concubine in the imperial palace, so the sects didn't want to interfere. Hearing Shi Fengshan's words, they finally understood the reason for Master Zhu Gui's sudden death last year. Shi Fengshan knew what the crowd was thinking about, so he stopped talking about this matter with a slight frown. "Those two demons have never killed anyone alive, so we don't have many clues," he said. "All we know is that one of them is tall and the other is short, a man and a woman. Their faces were covered with gray cloth, and they used flying swords. What do you think?" But what could they think about these clues? It was quiet. All in all, it has nothing to do with us. The middle-aged man who spoke had a dark complexion. He was a cultivation practitioner from Ozawa, and his Taoist title was Zui. The crowd thought it was nonsense. Ozawa practiced the wind-rain magic, so it had nothing to do with them. The Yushur continued. "Since they use swords and use them so well, they must be Bulo Lin, the No Mercy sect, and the West Ocean." Shi Fengshan shook his head and said, "Though the assassins of Bulo Lin are sinister and vicious, they wouldn't act so recklessly. As for the No Mercy sect," though he didn't finish his sentence, the crowd understood what he meant. The No Mercy sect had been suppressed by the West Ocean in recent years, so they didn't have the mood to stir up trouble in the world. Normally, the No Mercy sect and the Western Sea Sword School were almost equal in strength, and the resources of the No Mercy sect were far superior to the West Ocean. Unfortunately, the West Ocean had a godly swordsman, so they couldn't do anything about it. As for the West Ocean, though no swordsmen of the West Ocean were present, this was Haijo, a place with a great influence. Who would dare criticize the West Ocean? Someone suddenly said, "Why doesn't anyone suspect the Aoyama sect?" The murder happened first in Shangzhou, and then in Chownan City, which is the territory of the Aoyama sect. The crowd was startled, thinking that this person was brave enough to suspect the Aoyama sect. They understood the reason after they saw who the person was. That person was Zhu Jie, the younger brother of Zhu Gui, the headmaster of the Black Dragon Temple who had been killed. He was also a famous free-traveling practitioner in Zhongzhou, and it was said that he had a good relationship with the Western Sea Sword School. Thinking of this, the crowd's gazes fell on an inconspicuous corner. Two young men were sitting there. The two of them wore the green sword robes. They hadn't spoken a word since the beginning, keeping a low profile. The one with a calm expression was Yao Song's Han, ranked 11th on Liangwang Peak of the Aoyama sect. The younger disciple was Lin Yingliang, who was learning the sword work on Shirua Peak. He was brought out by Yao Song's Han to gain experience. Yao Song's Han looked in that direction, saying nothing, but the expression in his eyes was as sharp as a real sword. Lin Yingliang couldn't help but ask Zhu Jie, "Do you have a death wish?" Chapter 78. The crowd could see clearly that the young disciple of the Aoyama sect was only in the state of inherited will, and he should have followed his big brother out of the mountains to gain experience. Normally, he was not a match for Zhu Jie, but somehow when he said this, the crowd felt that Zhu Jie would be killed instantly if he wielded his sword. Was this the sword power of the Aoyama sect? Zhu Jie's face turned pale. He came a bit late today because he wanted to get to know one of Xu Wang's son's personal attendants, so he didn't know that someone from the Aoyama sect had come. Hearing this, he couldn't help but feel regretful, as well as resentful. Why did the Aoyama sect sit in that dark corner and didn't say anything from beginning to end, pretending to keep a low profile? I was just talking nonsense. I hope you two cultivation friends won't blame me, he said hastily. Zuyusher of Ozawa said to Yao Songshan with a smile, "You should change your pet phrase. It's really scary." The Aoyama sect and Ozawa were on good terms, so Yao Songshan nodded in acknowledgement, saying nothing more. Seeing this, Shi Fengshan sighed in his mind and waved his sleeve lightly, changing the picture on the wall. It was a map magnified many times, on which the locations of each murder case were marked with red dots, forming a line. A practitioner asked confusedly, "Those two magic demons turned to Chaonan City from Shangzhou, and then headed northward, and then turned westward at Yuzhou. It's like they started from Nanhezu and circled around the central and southern part of the Central Land. Where are they heading to? What do they want to do?" Someone had discovered an even more difficult problem. Why didn't they ride their swords? We also think these two questions are strange, but we don't have an answer. I only know that if they followed this line, they would appear in Haizhou City in a few days. Shi Fengshan said, "If they dared commit murder again, couldn't they be caught by so many immortal masters?" The reason the Pure Heaven Bureau chose Haizhou as the location of the encirclement was because the Four Seas banquet would be held there soon, and many orthodox cultivation practitioners would attend. What if they come to the Ocean Province, but don't do anything? Someone asked. After a moment of silence, Shi Fengshan said, "Then we have no choice but to ask the swordsman of the Hall of Heavenly Calculation of the Western Ocean for help." The place fell silent once more. Suddenly, a voice rang out. "Well, fellow Taoists, have you noticed that the two of them have killed many demons along the way, and the ones who died?" Bai Xiaochun said. He didn't finish his sentence, but everyone knew what he wanted to say. The people who were killed were not good people, such as the abbot of Black Dragon Temple, Master Zhuge. Everyone knew this, but no one said it out loud. When they realized that the one who spoke was the young doctor monk from the Guocheng Temple, they immediately felt that it was only natural. The Kunlun sect's elder, He Zhicheng, glanced at the young monk doctor. Zhu Jie sneered, saying, "The case in Chaonan City started when the sect of three in your temple fought over the medicine. The people of the sect of three died, but the medicine fell into the hands of your temple. Of course, nobody would suspect that the Guocheng Temple would collude with those murderers. But what the young master said is a bit inappropriate." The young monk was a bit angry. He wanted to argue, but he didn't know what to say, his face turning red. This kind of thing didn't require much careful planning. All the cultivation practitioners of various sects had to do was wait for the notification when the Pure Heaven Bureau found the two demonic swordsmen. As for the possibility of a bloody battle, they weren't worried. Even if that demon was in the middle state of the undefeated, they had the help of the elder He Zhicheng of Kunlun and the immortal master Yao Songshan of Aoyama, two swordsmen of the undefeated state. Moreover, they were in Haizhou. Once the swordsmen of the Western Sea Sword School attacked, where could they run to? After leaving the office of the Pure Heaven Bureau, the practitioners dispersed, most of them going to the Immortal House. It was the first time Lin Yingliang had come out of the mountains to experience such a thing, so he couldn't help but feel nervous and excited. "We have to catch those two demons," he said. Yao Songshan felt something was wrong, but he couldn't figure it out. Seeing the two cultivationists of Aoyama leaving, the young monk of Guocheng Temple was a bit worried, saying to the old monk by his side, "Senior Master, why didn't you say anything? We know who they want to deal with." Even if we can't say anything, we should at least tell the two in front of us." The old monk didn't pay attention to him, thinking that the relationship between the 9 peaks of Aoyama was complicated. Who knew which peak the 2 cultivationists who helped him in Chounan City 2 years ago were from? The 2 cultivationists of Aoyama were from Liangwang Peak, and it was said that they were very strict with both themselves and their peers. What if they got into trouble by telling the truth? The young monk was still talking. "The fortune masters of the Hall of Heavenly Calculation of the Western Ocean are the best at calculating. What if they are surrounded? Senior Master, we have to find a way to contact." The old monk said, "We don't need to worry about those 2 cultivationists. You don't need to cause any trouble. Just keep practicing the vow of silence." The young monk uttered an ah, then closed his mouth, feeling somewhat wronged, and let out a few muffled sounds. The old monk said, "How long will we practice?" "Until we leave Haijo, of course, or until those 2 cultivationists leave Haijo." Outside Haijo, there was no one on Mount Han, very desolate. The wind came from afar. Zhao Leu stood by the cliff's edge, her dress fluttering. The childishness on her face was gone, and the expression in her eyes was calmer, or perhaps more determined. She still had short hair like a boy's, but it was no longer messy. Looking at her back and thinking of all that had happened along the way, Jingjiu felt somewhat sentimental. He didn't tell her where he was going or what he was going to do, and he didn't tell her who he was. Back in Zhaoga City, he had chosen her, and since then he hadn't paid any attention to her. But she had never forgotten him, so he ought to return the favor. In these last 2 years, he had used his own method to teach her. Tens of thousands of li, slaying demons. Walking, sitting, stopping, all was cultivation. In silence, Zhao Leu gazed at a distant lonely mountain. Suddenly, a sword glow appeared in her clear black and white eyes. In the warm red sky, illuminated by the setting sun, an even deeper red color suddenly appeared. A muffled boom resounded from the distant lonely mountain. The red light pierced through the air and vanished in her palm. But that smear of red in the sky still existed. The thoughtless sword, stained with blood for 2 years, was naturally redder than the sunset. In a place so close to Haijo City, there's actually a human-eating monster. I really don't know what those good-for-nothings of the Western Sea are doing. Zhao Lei walked back to Jingjiu's side and said, "The Aoyama sect considered itself the most orthodox sword school in the world, and they had always looked down on the Western Sea Sword School. Even though the Western Sea had a godly swordsman, it only made the disciples of Aoyama have a worse impression of the Western Sea Sword School." Jingjiu said, "The number of people eaten by this monster in a year is less than 1/10 of the number of fishermen who died fishing for pearls at sea. The vitality pearls, a specialty of the Western Sea, were more precious than the common crystals. They were distributed by the Western Sea Sword School and the Imperial Court every year. In order to fish for the vitality pearls, many fishermen died at the bottom of the sea every year. In other words, the number of fishermen who died for the cultivation practitioners to break through the state was much more than the number of people eaten by this monster." Zhao Lei understood what he meant. 2 years ago in Shangzhou City, Jingjiu had said that the cultivation practitioners had to be heartless. "Where are we going next?" she asked. After leaving Aoyama, she was the one who decided where to go, such as the Precious Tree House, which had a close relationship with Bihu Peak, or Master Meng's hometown. The curtain rollers who exposed her identity and maids were determined to kill her was also one of the clues, but that person had disappeared without a trace. But gradually, she found that her choice was actually Jingjiu's idea. Even though she had discovered this, she didn't use her status as the big sister to ask for a change. It was because she had gradually sensed that Jingjiu was actually teaching her, whether it was the walking itself, the seemingly monotonous killing, or the occasional words and eye contact he said or glanced at her. She wasn't sure what Jingjiu had taught her, and she didn't know where Jingjiu wanted to go or what he wanted to do. But she knew he had a destination or a purpose. "This is the place." Jingjiu looked at Haijo City, illuminated by the setting sun in the distance, and said, "I'm here to see someone." After leaving Aoyama and wandering around the land for 2 years, killing more than 70 people and more monsters. He just wanted to see someone. The two didn't encounter any trouble when they entered Haizhou City. When they were in Yuzhou, Zhao Lei must have gotten 2 real travel passes through her family connections. Their first meal in Haizhou City was still hot pot. This place was close to the West Sea, so the ingredients for the hot pot were naturally seafood, which tasted good together with the fresh malt wine. Looking at the vegetables in the soup that were almost cooked, Zhao Lei finally couldn't help but ask. Chapter 79. It had been 2 years. Every time Jing Jiao came to a city, he would have a hot pot meal. Though Zhao Lei didn't ask about it, it didn't mean she didn't think about it. Jing Jiao didn't answer her question. It was because he didn't know whether he wanted to see that person in the hot pot restaurant or whether it had become a habit. All of a sudden, a tune rang out. The tinkling sound was like the spring water, falling into the ears and echoing in the heart, extremely clear. The tune was beautiful, but this was a hot pot restaurant, so it didn't feel right, even though Jing Jiao and Zhao Lei sat in a private room. Jing Jiao put on the conical hat. Zhao Lei took the conical hat and put it on as well. After passing Yuzhou, they walked more and more slowly, and the cloth covering their faces and heads changed back to the conical hat from the gray cloth. Those who had met them later had all died. As such, the portraits of the Pure Heaven Bureau were still the same as when they were at the Precious Tree House. As the door of the room was opened, a faint surprised cry rang out. A young girl stood outside the room with a peep in her arms. She was small, her plain clothing a bit too big for her, and a white jasmine flower was inserted in her hair, looking rather plain. Zhao Lei recalled the scene when she tried on the clothes of Senior Grandmaster Jingyang on the top of Shinma Peak and put down a few copper coins on the table. The young girl walked to the table hesitantly and put away the copper coins. "Someone wants to harm you too. Please be careful," she said quickly in a low voice. "Raise your head," said Zhao Lei. The young girl was taken aback slightly, and then raised her head, revealing a pretty face with a feeble expression in her eyes, which was quite lovable. "Vixen," said Zhao Lei. The young girl blushed slightly, asking with tears in her eyes, "Why did you curse us?" "She's indeed a vixen," said Jing Jiao. Jing Jiao and Zhao Lei weren't cursing anyone. The young girl was certain that her true identity had been discovered. "Where are you 2 immortal masters from? How can you find out my true identity?" Her small face revealed a slightly fearful expression. The jasmine flower trembled slightly, and the look in her eyes became even more gentle. She had practiced a secret method, and even a swordsman in the state of free travel might not be able to recognize her real face. Unexpectedly, she was seen through by Jing Jiao and Zhao Lei. She didn't know that Zhao Lei cultivated the tempered body of sword will. Her eyesight was many times sharper than cultivators in the same realm, not to mention Jing Jiao. Zhao Lei said, "I didn't expect Shao He City to be a demon cultivator." She and Jing Jiao had traveled for 2 years. Even though they didn't have much contact with people, they still knew something about the cultivation world. This girl's name was Shao He, and she was a famous female cultivator in Ying City. She was known for being cruel and merciless. 2 years ago, because the young master of the Three Capitals sect had verbally harassed her, she had planted a flower poison in him. Seeing that they even called out her name, Shao He didn't try to hide it anymore. She knelt down in front of the 2 of them. "If the 2 immortal masters hadn't killed those scoundrels of the Three Capitals sect, that scoundrel would still be after me. I'm a demon cultivator, and I don't have the protection of a sect. I can't deal with either the sect master of the Three Capitals sect or a disciple of Kunlun. I'm here to warn you because I'm grateful to the 2 immortal masters." "Who?" asked Zhao Lei. "The Pure Heaven Bureau," said Shao He. It happened to be the Four Seas banquet. Many practitioners participated in the event, including the elders of Kunlun, the swordsmen of Ozawa, the highly achieved monks of Guoqing Temple, and the immortal masters of Aoyama. "How did you know it was us?" asked Zhao Lei. Shao He said uneasily, "I can't tell you. Please don't ask me." It grew quiet in the room. The soup in the hot pot was boiling, making gurgling sounds. Xiao He said worriedly. Even though the two immortal masters have powerful magic power, the enemies are too many. It's better not to stay in Haizhou. Shall we kill them? Asked Zhao Liu while looking at Jingjiao. It's up to you, said Jingjiao. Xiao He opened her eyes wide, looking innocent. A moment later, she understood the meaning of the conversation between the two of them. She was alarmed, anxious, and scared, and her eyes were covered with a layer of mist, looking pitiful. I feel sorry for them, said Zhao Liu. Should we bring them back to keep them company with the principal guard? They'll bite them to death, said Jingjiao. Forget it. You can leave now, said Zhao Liu. Xiao He had seen a lot of things, but she had never seen such a weirdo. She didn't dare stay any longer and left hastily with her peepa in her arms. A plate of green lobster and a plate of sliced conch brought the boiling hot pot soup back to its usual calmness. Zhao Liu looked out of the window. The sunset grew redder. All of a sudden, a huge shadow approached from the other side of the ocean. The huge shadow in the sky was a flying whale shuttling through the clouds. With a deep and melodious cry, the flying whale spewed out a great deal of seawater, which fell down like raindrops. Haizhou City welcomed the spring rain in advance at the end of winter. A rainbow appeared at the edge of the sunset, looking extremely beautiful. Haizhou City was filled with cheers. This was a grand ceremony of the West Ocean to welcome the cultivation practitioners who had come from afar for the Four Seas banquet. Looking at the rainy sky, Zhao Liu asked, "Should I identify myself?" It had taken her 2 years to get here, so she knew that Jingjiao wouldn't leave before he met that person. So what if she identified herself? The inherited sword competition would begin in a few days, and they would return to Aoyama. No hurry, said Jingjiao. Zhao Liu withdrew her gaze and looked at him, asking seriously, "How should we fight then?" Along the way, they had slain demons and killed people. Although they seemed arrogant, they were actually well-behaved. Most of the demons and opponents that Zhao Liu had encountered, or those that Jingjiao had chosen for her, were weaker than her in terms of cultivation state. In other words, they only chose opponents that they could kill. Zhao Liu had a question. Shouldn't a strong cultivator attack another strong cultivator in order to become stronger? Jingjiao's answer was that no one could become stronger if they died after one attack. Because of the Four Seas banquet, many cultivation practitioners had gathered in Haizhou City. No matter how talented they were, their cultivation time was limited and they couldn't defeat them. What should they do then? Jingjiao looked at her and asked, "Have you ever heard a sword art called descending from the sky?" No, Zhao Liu answered after some thought. What should you do when you know that many people are looking for you? Jingjiao had always been simple, just like his style of cutting vegetables. He went straight to their door. He was looking for his fellow disciples. As the Four Seas banquet was about to begin, many cultivation practitioners of different sects arrived. The immortal residences were already full, but the immortal masters of the Aoyama sect lived there as well. The Aoyama sect, Ozawa, and Guocheng Temple had been on good terms with each other for generations, and they lived in a small courtyard. The small courtyard was quiet, but not tranquil. Because of that incident, Haizhou City, which looked lively and joyous, had a feeling that a storm was coming. In fact, neither Yao Songzhan nor Zuyusher of Ozawa had any interest in killing those two so-called demonic swordsmen. In their eyes, the demons and humans killed by those two had their own reasons to die. Moreover, the cultivation practitioners were fighting against destiny, and they didn't care about life and death, so killing was a common occurrence. If the headmaster of Black Dragon Temple who had been killed by those two hadn't been related to the royal concubine in the imperial palace, the Pure Heaven Bureau wouldn't have taken this matter so seriously. Suddenly, the courtyard door was pushed open, and two men wearing conical hats walked in. Zuyusher narrowed his eyes and asked, "Who are you?" As he spoke, he had already prepared the magic method, ready to attack at any moment. The conical hat was not a gray cloth, but it could also cover the head and face. Yao Songzhan raised his eyebrows slightly, like swords, ready to fly up at any moment. Sensing the sword coming from his big brother, Lin Yingliang came back to his senses. Seeing the two people walking into the small courtyard, he was a bit surprised, but he didn't panic or show any fear. His right hand gripped the hilt of his sword, ready to unsheath it at any moment. He thought to himself that these two demonic swordsmen dared to come to him. They must be courting death. A man and a woman, one tall and one short. Looking at the two people wearing bamboo hats, the strange feeling in Yao Songshan's heart grew stronger and stronger. He didn't draw his sword, but asked while staring at them, "Who are you?" The shorter woman didn't take off her conical hat, but waved her hand up and down in front of her. The expression on Yao Songshan's face suddenly became very strange. The old monk of the Guocheng temple understood what was going on and knew there was nothing to worry about. He smiled and nodded in greeting, then pulled his excited young master back to his own room. So Yusher didn't know what was going on, but he understood what was going on. He waved his hand with a smile and returned to his own room. Yao Songshan led the two people back to his own room. Lin Yingliang followed them in bewilderment, wondering what was going on. Closing the door, Yao Songshan looked at the two people and bowed. "Greetings, senior masters." Chapter 80. We killed those people. Zhao Lei took off her conical hat and said to Yao Songshan. Jingzhou also took off his conical hat. Looking at the beautiful face that he hadn't seen for a long time, Lin Yingliang finally confirmed that this person was indeed his senior master. As the peak master of Shinmao, Yao Songshan treated Zhao Lei with respect, but hearing what she said, he couldn't help but let out a bitter smile, saying helplessly, "Senior master has come out of the mountains to travel, and I've seen some injustice, so it's my duty to kill, but I've killed too many people. There are so many people who deserve to die. You should just kill more." Zhao Lei glanced at Jingzhou. When they were in Shangzhou, he had said that it was impossible to eliminate evil, and it was impossible to kill all the evildoers. Yao Songshan thought about it and said seriously, "Senior master's words are reasonable. You did a good job." It wasn't flattery or mockery. He really thought so. Zhao Lei suddenly felt that Liangwang Peak was not bad, at least in this aspect. "What's your name?" "Yao Songshan from Shangda Peak, 11th of Liangwang Peak." "How's Aoyama?" She and Jingzhou didn't know the current situation of Aoyama after traveling in the world for 2 years without any contact with the sect. Yao Songshan briefly told her what had happened in Aoyama in the past 2 years. There wasn't much to say. Most of the second-generation swordsmen were in closed-door training, and the disciples were practicing their swordsmanship diligently. It was no different from the past hundreds or thousands of years. For cultivators, 2 years was indeed too short a time, and it was very difficult for too many changes to occur. "How's Lu Shui recently?" Zhao Lei knew this was what Jingzhou wanted to know, even though he hadn't mentioned the name Lu Shui even once in the past 2 years. Yao Songshan was a little hesitant, and Lin Yingliang was even more uneasy. Zhao Lei was convinced that something must have happened to Lu Shui, so she said, "Speak." Through Yao Songshan's narration, Zhao Lei learned that too many things had happened to Lu Shui in the past 2 years. 2 years ago, when he was sent back to Aoyama from the Muddy River, he had been in a coma with a high fever. When he woke up, he was imprisoned in the sword jail of Shangda Peak. Shanghai Peak suspected that he had eaten the Dace Devil's monster pill. After an extremely harsh interrogation, Lu Shui was released because there was no direct evidence. However, he was unable to resume his normal cultivation. This was because everyone in the 9 peaks of Aoyama believed that he had secretly eaten the monster core, including his master, Elder Bai Rujing. Bai Rujing was extremely disappointed in him. Although he didn't expel him from the sect, he never gave him any guidance on cultivation. Perhaps because he didn't want to hear those discussions or see those strange looks, Lu Shui became more taciturn. He stayed in his cave residence all day long and rarely showed up. It was said that someone once saw him go to Liangwang Peak at night, but he soon went down the mountain. Obviously, Liangwang Peak, which had placed high hopes on him, had no intention of taking him in. If he goes on like this, he will probably be forgotten. But 1 year ago, Yao Songshan paused for a while and continued. Shanghai Peak suddenly started to reinvestigate the death of senior uncles of Bihu Peak. It is said that Lu Shui is also a suspect. Although he couldn't have done it himself, and the details are not clear, Senior Uncle Duan was in charge of the interrogation, but I don't know why he wasn't put in the sword jail. Zhao Liu glanced at Jingjiu, wondering why he could be so calm. She asked Yao Songzhan, "Do you also think he ate the devil pill?" "Yes." Thinking of those rumors, Yao Songzhan glanced at Jingjiu and said, "I believe the masters won't make a mistake. The temptation of the path of heaven is indeed hard to bear for a disciple like him who grows up too fast. I'm not the only one who thinks so. All the colleagues on the Nine Peaks think so." Lin Yingliang couldn't help but say, "There are still some people who don't believe Shui would make a mistake." Gu Qing went back to Liangwang Peak for this matter and quarreled with Big Brother Guhan. Gu Qing was expelled from Liangwang Peak. He was willing to go back and quarrel with his brother, which meant he thought Liangwang Peak was too ruthless. "Gu Qing, how is he?" Jing Jiu finally spoke. "I'm not sure. He stays on Shima Peak all day long. Nobody knows what he's doing." Lin Yingliang said this while looking at Jing Jiu, thinking that the current Gu Qing was very similar to the one by the stream of sword washing. Yao Songzhan didn't want to talk about this matter anymore. He looked at Zhao Liu and asked, "Senior Master, are you here to participate in the Four Seas banquet?" "We're here to see someone," Zhao Liu said. Haizhou was the territory of the Western Sea Sword School, and the most famous person there was naturally the godly swordsman of West Ocean. He was a figure in the heavenly arrival state who was as famous as the sect master of Aoyama. In Yao Songshan's opinion, the person Zhao Liu came to see could only be this person, given her current status. He shook his head and said, "The host of the Four Seas banquet is not the godly swordsman of West Ocean, but Shiwang Sunday. For years ago, a mysterious figure suddenly appeared in Haizhou. His cultivation state was unfathomable, and he called himself Shiwang's son, who had great power in the Western Sea Sword School. It was said that he was the illegitimate son of the godly swordsman, and some said that he was the personal disciple of the godly swordsman. Another said that he was the young brother of the godly swordsman. Either way, the godly swordsman didn't admit it, nor did he deny it. It was after the appearance of Shiwang's son that the Four Seas banquet was held in Haizhou City. Anyone could tell that the West Ocean Sword School didn't like the ruling of the imperial court and wanted to hold a grand banquet to compete with the plum meeting in Zhaoga City. Since the Four Seas banquet had just started, it couldn't be compared to the plum meeting. In order to attract the cultivation practitioners to participate in the Four Seas banquet, the West Ocean Sword Sect would prepare 4 extremely rare treasures each time, which would be given to the 4 winners. Even so, few swordsmen of the older generation and those famous geniuses were willing to participate in the Four Seas banquet. The geniuses like Tong Yin wouldn't attend the Four Seas banquet, and Zhuo Rizhui wouldn't come even if he didn't stay behind closed doors at Tianguang Peak. This time, the Aoyama sect had only sent 2 disciples of the 3rd generation, Yao Songzhan and Lin Yingliang. Ozawa and Guochang Temple had also sent some disciples who happened to be in the vicinity to represent them. However, it was said that the Zhongzhou School and Shui Nunnery had sent 2 outstanding disciples to the Four Seas banquet. It was unknown what price the West Ocean Sword School had to pay. If the Aoyama sect was the #1 orthodox sword sect in the world, then the Zhongzhou School was the #1 orthodox sword sect in the world in the eyes of most of the cultivation practitioners. Because of its close proximity to Zhaoga City, the Zhongzhou School had excellent disciples and talented geniuses every generation. In terms of the recent decades, the Zhongzhou School was even more famous than the Aoyama sect. Yet, Zhao Liu was concerned about something else. What would be the competition at the Four Seas banquet? If it were a competition of cultivation states, she was confident that she wouldn't lose to any of her peers. If it were a competition of killing people, she was confident that she could defeat all of her peers. A few days ago, she had flown across Aoyama and killed the head monk of the Black Dragon Temple. She was convinced that even Tong Yin, who was the same age as her 7 years ago, was no match for her. Yao Songzhan said they will compete in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Chapter 81. Yao Song's Han said, "This person is very mysterious. Few people have seen him, and he won't show up at the Four Seas banquet. Only the four winners will meet him on the cloud platform when they are presented with the treasures. Those cultivation friends who have met him before have a high opinion of him." Glancing at Jing Jiu once, Zhao Lei guessed that this was the person he wanted to meet. Yao Song's Han said, "If Senior Master doesn't want to be disturbed, should I go to the Pure Heaven Bureau and settle this matter?" This matter referred to the gathering of the cultivation practitioners by the Pure Heaven Bureau to besiege Zhao, Lei, and Jingjiu. Yao Song's Han was merely a disciple of Liang Wang Peak, so he was quite calm and confident when it came to settling this matter. "No need. Just pretend that you don't know anything about it." Zhao Lei said, "Let's talk about it when we have to reveal our identities." Yao Song's Han said, "This disciple obeys your order." Back at the inn, Zhao Lei asked, "Why do you want to meet Xu Wang's son?" Jingjiu said, "I suspect he is alone." "In San?" Zhao Lei asked, raising her eyebrows slightly. In terms of timing, the death of In San and the sudden appearance of Xi Wang's son at the West Ocean were quite close. Jingjiu said after a moment of silence, "I'm not sure." Zhao Lei asked, "Who is In San? Why do you think he is still alive?" Jingjiu still didn't answer this question. Zhao Lei asked after a moment of silence, "Are we going to the Four Seas banquet then?" Jingjiu said, "I don't know how to play zither, chess, calligraphy, or painting." Zhao Lei was surprised, asking, "There's something you don't know?" Jingjiu thought that he didn't have the time and interest to learn it back then, and no one in the small village played it either. "Do you know it?" he asked. Zhao Lei was silent again for a while, then said, "I learned it for a few days when I was young, but I'm not interested." As they spoke, they had no idea that their whereabouts had already been discovered by the Pure Heaven Bureau. There were at least hundreds of pairs of eyes in Haizhou City, staring at the inns and temples everywhere. They wouldn't miss a single suspect. Since they were wearing conical hats, they attracted a lot of attention and soon became the targets of the Pure Heaven Bureau. Late at night, dozens of faintly discernible presences appeared around the inn. These were cultivators from all over the continent. The cultivators were separated by hundreds of feet, forming a seemingly wide net that trapped the inn in the middle. A flying sword hovered silently in the dark clouds. It was written clearly in the files that the two had traveled all over the continent and had never ridden a sword, but the Pure Heaven Bureau was sure that they had the ability to ride a sword. To prevent them from escaping through the sky, the best place to guard the inn was He Zhichong, the elder of Kunlun with a profound cultivation state. Yao Song's Han of the Aoyima sect was arranged to guard the place closest to the inn. The Western Sea Sword School didn't have a good relationship with Zhaoga City, so they didn't send any swordsmen to participate in the siege organized by the Pure Heaven Bureau. But in the night sky on the other side of the ocean, a formidable energy could be felt along with the wind. It was evident that a swordsman of a very high cultivation state was there. He was probably worried that the operation of the Pure Heaven Bureau would cause chaos in Haizhou City, so he was ready to strike at any time. After all these arrangements were made, hundreds of magic soldiers advanced toward the inn along with a firework. Their footsteps were as dense as raindrops, and they were not afraid of disturbing the people in the inn. Even the swordsmen in the Broken Sea state couldn't figure out the intentions of the mortals by the streets, unless they stayed in the cold mountains and the wilderness. As long as they entered the cities or villages, nobody could conceal their whereabouts. Jingjiu and Zhao Lei were no exception. Yet, Zhao Lei woke up when the first cultivation practitioner arrived outside the inn. She put on the conical hat and walked to the window, standing shoulder to shoulder with Jingjiu, looking at the seemingly peaceful but actually dangerous street. Jingjiu's expression was still calm, devoid of any worry. If he and Zhao Lei revealed their identities, nobody would dare attack them. Even though the Pure Heaven Bureau had spent a great deal of time, energy, and resources to organize this siege, they could do nothing but watch them leave. If they wanted to do so, they should have asked Yao Song's Han to do it in the immortal house in the evening. Zhao Lei didn't know what was on his mind. The floor suddenly slid toward the corner of the wall. exposing the entrance to the passage. A white jasmine flower emerged from the shadows. It was Xiao He of Yingcheng, who had played a piece of music in the hot pot restaurant during the day. Xiao He waved her hand at them and said softly, "Follow me." There was a secret passage in the inn. How could it be concealed from the Pure Heaven Bureau? Though the swordsmen of the Pure Heaven Bureau were few in number, they seldom missed such details. Jingzhou walked toward the passage without hesitation. Zhao Liu suddenly realized that Jingzhou had been waiting for this woman. The passage was very long, and without any illumination, it was as dark as an abyss. If Jingzhou and Zhao Liu didn't have good eyesight, they would have a hard time moving forward. Xiao He was a devil practitioner, and her true cultivation state couldn't be determined, but she led the way with ease. It was unclear what was so peculiar about her. After a long while, Xiao He finally stopped. According to Zhao Liu's estimation, they should have left Haizhou City a long time ago. Didn't I tell you to leave Haizhou City as soon as possible? Why didn't you listen to me? Xiao He said while looking at them, "You have to understand that once you come in, you won't be able to leave." Jingzhou looked at her in silence, making sure she was telling the truth. This truth had two meanings, and it had two meanings. The heavy stone door was pushed open, making no sound. Jingzhou and Zhao Liu followed Xiao He out of the passage. The night wind blew over their faces, bringing with it a salty and fishy smell. The sound of the waves was very clear, so it should be nearby. This was a broken cliff by the sea, on top of which was a dilapidated sea god temple that had lost its incense offerings a long time ago. They were standing right in front of the ruined temple. The sword lights could be vaguely seen in the distance, illuminating the surface of the ocean from time to time. The West Ocean at night looked like a boundless ink lake. A barely discernible energy was gazing at the sea god temple from high up in the night sky. "Come in." Xiao He's voice sounded a bit distant, and it sounded a bit helpless. Jingzhou and Zhao Liu turned around and walked into the sea god temple. They crossed the threshold that had been blown apart by the sea wind and walked past the salt-covered walls, arriving at the deepest part of the sea god temple. There was a statue of the sea god there, but it was badly damaged with only half of its head left. A man in black walked out from behind the statue of the sea god. "What should you do when you are faced with the hostility of the whole world?" The man in black looked at Zhao Liu and said, "You need help from the other world or become a part of that world." His voice was deep and hoarse, as if it had some kind of magic power. Chapter 82. If asked what was the most mysterious organization in Chaotian, many people would say the curtain rollers. If asked what was the most formidable place in Chaotian, many people would say the underworld. But if asked what was the most formidable and mysterious organization in Chaotian, there was only one answer: Bulo Lin. Bulo Lin was a group of assassins. Bulo Lin would dare to kill anyone, regardless of whether they were the peddlers or the members of the royal family, the treacherous ministers or the loyal human heroes. Bulo Lin would even try to kill a swordsman in the Broken Sea State, and it was said that they had succeeded in doing so. Nobody knew who founded Bulo Lin, where it was located, or how many members it had. All the people knew was that the targets targeted by the old ones would soon lose their lives, and they would stay at their original age, never growing old again. The man in black didn't deny it. For an orthodox cultivation sect like Aoyama's sect, Bulo Lin was of course an evil deviant who had to be eliminated. Zhao Liu lowered her head slightly, and the conical hat covered more of her face. The man in black didn't feel surprised. He had seen many so-called evildoers, and those evildoers would behave unnaturally when they learned he was from Bulo Lin for the first time. The unnaturalness came from the fear or inferiority when they saw the evildoers. As long as you are willing to join Bulo Lin, you can have anything. He said this to Zhao Liu with a smile, his voice hoarser and more alluring. Crystals? Yes. Precious medicines? You can have them too. Even if you want to have a reputation and status in the cultivation circle, we can help you. Zhao Liu said, "You can't give me what I want." The man in black stopped laughing and said icily, I appreciate what you have done over the last 2 years, so I came out to meet you. It looks like you still lack the courage to step into the real world that not everybody is qualified to see. Maybe I should come back to meet you when you're captured by the Pure Heaven Bureau and can't stand the torture." Zhao Liu said, "I don't accept threats." The man in black said, "You really have the demeanor of a disciple of a big sect. But no matter which sect you are from, you have offended the imperial concubine in the palace this time. It is already impossible for you to return to the sect. Don't expect to return to the cultivation world and have a good future." Jing Jiu had been listening in silence. He was sure that the other party was just an ordinary deacon in Bulow Lin. He did not want to listen anymore and said to Zhao Liu, "Hurry up." In the past 2 years, he often accompanied Zhao Liu to slay demons and kill people. At first, it was a bit of a novelty, but later it became boring and he often urged her to hurry up. At that time, he would often say these 2 words. This kind of thing had happened too many times, and she had heard these 2 words too many times. Zhao Liu didn't even think about it, and subconsciously moved. The sea breeze poured into the ruined temple, ruffling her black hair. The swift and fierce sword was about to leave her body. As an assassin in Bulow Lin, the man in black had always been the one who sneak attacked his opponents. When had he ever been sneak attacked by others? In shock and anger, he summoned 17 small black flags as fast as he could and placed them around him. Those black flags were cold and gloomy, as if there were countless resentful souls in them. They were extraordinary. They were the best treasures of the mysterious dark sect to deal with those sword sects, the Banner of Fallen Swords. The Banner of Fallen Swords was made of 17 rare materials, so it was very sensitive to fairy swords. No matter how profound the opponent's swordsmanship was, as long as the flying sword left the hand of the opponent, the Banner of Fallen Swords would determine its position and affect it, disrupting the flying sword's trajectory in the shortest time possible. If there was a big gap between the 2 party states, the holder of the banner could even directly cut off the connection between the flying sword and its master. The man in black was sure that even if his Banner of Fallen Swords couldn't knock down the opponent's flying sword, it could definitely block the opponent's flying sword. He would take advantage of this opportunity to sneak into the underground of the Sea God Temple, activate the formation that he had prepared beforehand, and kill the opponent with one strike. He was indeed an assassin in Bulow Lin. In such a sudden attack, he could come up with a way to deal with it in such a short time, and it could be said to be flawless. But he still underestimated his opponent. He didn't know that he was facing the youngest peak master in the history of Aoyama's sect in decades. More importantly, in the past 2 years, Zhao Liu had repeatedly tested her swordsmanship, and her sword fighting awareness was at its peak. She didn't draw her sword, but turned herself into a sword. Her short hair moved with the wind, becoming messy again. She disappeared from where she was. When she reappeared, she was already in front of the man in black. In an instant, she had crossed the distance of dozens of feet and passed through those black flags. 2 clear wounds appeared on her shoulder and earlobe, and black dirty blood was seeping out. She didn't care about this at all and directly slammed her palm towards the man in black's chest. The man in black didn't have time to recall his black flags, and with a strange cry, his right hand flipped upwards to meet her palm. His palm was extremely thin and didn't look like it belonged to a living person. The edge of his palm was emitting a dark glow, and it was unknown what kind of demonic art it contained. A light clap. The 2 palms met. A bright red sword appeared from Zhao Liu's palm. Cha! The sword easily pierced through the man in black's palm, then continued forward and pierced through his chest. A bright red sword tip appeared from behind the man in black's back. Not sure if it was its original color, or if it was dyed red by the man in black's blood. Drip! Blood dripped onto the ground of the ruined temple. The man in black slowly knelt down and died. His eyes were filled with disbelief and despair. The sea breeze suddenly became violent. The peeling walls of the ruined temple were blown into powder, flying everywhere. The powerful pressure in the night sky felt like it was getting closer and closer to the ground. Zhao Liu raised her head to look at the sky above the ruined temple. The distinct black and white eyes under the conical hat were filled with a piercing sword will and a boundless desire to fight. I can't beat him, Jingjiu said to her. Maybe in 10 years. Xiaohe opened her eyes innocently, her face blank. She couldn't understand what she was seeing. They were in the middle of a negotiation, so why did Zhao Liu suddenly kill someone? It didn't make sense. As she was thinking about this, she suddenly felt a slight coldness in a part of her body. She looked down and found an iron sword pierced through her right shoulder. The iron sword had pierced through her body and nailed her to the wall of the ruined temple. Blood gushed out of her body and flowed along the iron sword. Xiaohe felt her body getting colder and colder, and then she felt extreme pain, and her face became very pale. She raised her head to look at Jingjiu, shocked and speechless. The iron sword was in Jingjiu's hand. She had been guarding against Zhao Liu because she was afraid of her. Bulolin knew better than the Pure Heaven Bureau how many people Zhao Liu had killed over the last 2 years and how she had killed them. She couldn't figure out Zhao Liu's true strength when they met at the hot pot restaurant, but she had never expected Jingjiu to be so formidable. She didn't even notice that Jingjiu had already wielded his sword until the iron sword pierced through her right shoulder. The iron sword was very wide, and Xiaohe was very small, looking even more pitiful. The expression in Jingjiu's eyes was very calm, devoid of any pity, and not deliberately cold. Jingjiu looked at her like he was looking at a regular stone or a fleeting wave in the West Ocean. Xiaohe knew that his true cultivation state was not higher than hers, and he wouldn't be able to subdue her if he hadn't sneak attacked her. Yet, she felt an extreme fear when she saw his expression and couldn't think of doing the right thing anymore. It was because she knew that this was the true ruthlessness. Chapter 83. The Antidote, said Jingjiu. Xiaohe knew that she couldn't play any tricks with such a person. Feeling remorseful, she took out a medicine pouch from her belt with her left hand and handed it over. Jingjiu took the medicine pouch and threw it to Zhao Liu, continuing to ask, "What's your position in Bulolin?" Xiaohe was a very smart girl, so she didn't dare to hesitate and answered, "I'm in the middle level, but I'm highly valued." From some details, Jingjiu was sure that she was the superior of the man in black. The only doubt was that her cultivation state was obviously lower than that man's. "Why?" "Because I can deceive anyone, except for you," Xiaohe said to him seriously. "I really don't understand why you can see through me." Xiaohe of Ying City is a female practitioner with a vicious temperament. This is one layer of disguise, but in fact, you are a seductive vixen, which is another layer of disguise. Only by tearing apart these two layers of disguise can we find that you are a weak, innocent, and pure girl. But who could think that this is still a layer of disguise? Zhao Liu took the antidote and said, "But as long as I am not confused by external things, how can I deceive the brilliant sword heart?" Xiaohe dropped her tears and asked, "Who are you?" Jingjiu didn't answer her question, but said directly, "I want you to do something for me." Xiaohe's eyelashes trembled slightly, indicating that she was hesitating. After a while, she finally raised her head and asked in a trembling voice, "What is it?" "Next year, or even later, you'll meet a person. No matter what he wants to do, I want you to help him." Jingjiu said, "If you can do this, I will help you leave Bulolin." Hearing this, Xiaohe's eyes brightened, but then dimmed quickly. She really wanted to leave Bulolin, but how could she leave Bulolin, a terrible place? Especially the mysterious background of Bulolin. Though she wasn't clear about it, she knew that a swordsman couldn't resist him. She said sadly, "I can't believe you." Jingjiu said, "You can only believe me." Xiaohe asked, "Then how can you trust me?" Jingjiu said, "I believe in your ability." After saying this, he took her left hand. The silver bracelet silently moved from his wrist to her wrist and could not be taken off anymore. Zhao Liu's gaze fell on the bracelet. She had always been curious about Jingjiu's bracelet. She herself once had a bracelet that had accompanied her for many years. After arriving at Shinma Peak, she found out that it was the thoughtless sword that martial granduncle Jingyong had left for her. What about Jing Jiu's bracelet? Could it also be a peerless famous sword? Why did he put the bracelet on the hand of a fox demon he had just met? Feeling the cold touch coming from her wrist, Xiao He felt extreme fear again. The bracelet was even more frightening than the other person's eyes, and it was even more frightening than the fear that Bulow Lin had brought to her. She didn't know what the bracelet was, but she had a strong feeling that if she thought about going back on her agreement with the other person, the bracelet would cut her into two pieces, not only her hand and wrist, but every part of her body, even her soul. Xiao He's face was very pale, and she said with a fearful expression, "How can I know? Who is the person you are talking about? You will know when you see him." Jing Jiu picked up the jasmine flower on her temple and put it in his sleeve. Not long after Xiao He left, the coercion in the night sky also gradually disappeared. The sea wind poured into the ruined temple, making a whistling sound. Jing Jiu walked to the cliff's edge and looked at the dark west sea, remaining silent for a long time. He didn't think about anything except looking at the sea, because he would leave in a few days and he wouldn't come back for many years in the foreseeable future. Zhao Liu came up behind him and asked, "You have been killing people for 2 years just to make Bulow Lin notice us?" "That's right, because I want to find them." Without turning his head, Jing Jiu said, "Of course, these 2 years have also been for cultivation." Zhao Liu asked, "Do you suspect that Bulow Lin has something to do with senior granduncle's failure in ascension?" Jing Jiu said, "First of all, it's not necessarily a failure. Secondly, it's impossible to determine the relationship now." Zhao Liu asked, "Who do you think will come to find her?" Jing Jiu said, "I hope she won't see that person." Zhao Liu asked, "Have you finished your work?" Looking at the West Sea and the night sky, Jing Jiu thought of Bulow Lin, Liangwang Peak, and Lu Shui, and said, "I haven't seen that person yet." Zhao Liu was a bit surprised and asked, "Isn't she the person you want to see? Is it really Shi Wang's son?" Yes, the person Jing Jiu wanted to see was Shi Wang's son, the host of the Four Seas banquet. The problem was that one could only see this person after participating in the Four Seas banquet and winning one of the 4 competitions. Jing Jiu looked at the depths of the West Sea and suddenly asked, "Is it difficult to learn chess?" On the day of the Four Seas banquet, many activities were held in Haizhou City, including top courtesans patrolling the streets, acrobatic troops invited from Yang County, and, of course, opera performances. Residents of Haizhou came out of their houses, and it was very lively. The food vendors laughed happily, but the soldiers in charge of security couldn't. This was the world of mortals, and the real Four Seas banquet was held in the lonely mountain outside Haizhou. Since early morning, the sky was illuminated by sword lights and treasures from time to time. Cultivators arrived one after another. Chapter 84. Standing on the plank road between the cliffs, Shurfengchen's expression became stern as he watched the 2 figures walking toward the buildings in the distance. The ocean wind ruffled his yellowish beard, but it couldn't ruffle the wrinkles on his face. Those wrinkles represented the effort he had put into the imperial court, as if they were made of iron. "Master, they are about to enter the building. Should we strike?" the subordinate asked. Shurfengchen narrowed his eyes and said, "Wait. There are so many guests at the Four Seas banquet. If we strike now, it will cause trouble." The subordinate understood what he meant. The Western Sea Sword School agreed to the request of the Pure Heaven Bureau to keep an eye on the Four Seas banquet, which was already a show of respect for the imperial court. If the Four Seas banquet ended abruptly in order to capture those 2 demonic swordsmen, or even caused more trouble, who would bear the anger of Shi Wang's son? Who was in the building at this time? Shurfengchen asked. Another subordinate said, "Most of the immortal masters have gone to the cloud platform." Shurfengchen was a bit displeased, thinking that they had escaped from the inn the night before, but those practitioners didn't take it seriously even though they knew they would come to the Four Seas banquet. What about the Aoyamist sect? They went there too. Who's there now? Senior Master Zhu Jia was in the Zither building, just now. Him? Good. Send someone to inform him to keep an eye on those two guys in the conical hats. The rest wait outside. Inform the Western Sea Sword School and ask them to bring the sword letters to the cloud platform. Don't worry about anything else. Shurfengchen's order was clear and definite. He believed they would be caught as soon as they left the Lone Mountain. The subordinates of the Pure Heaven Bureau also believed they couldn't escape today, so they couldn't help but feel puzzled. Why did they dare come to the Four Seas banquet? What was the difference between being so ostentatious and seeking death? If I'm not wrong, they're the abandoned disciples of a famous sect, which means they have no future in cultivation, so they were forced to leave the mountain gate and end up like this. For people like them, the most important thing is cultivation. If they can get the precious treasure from Shiwang's son, they might have some hope, so they must come. Shurfengchen sneered. People die for wealth, and birds die for food. The practitioners look superior, but what's the difference? Lonely Mountain was not lonely. The undulating mountain range grew along the coast, and the cliff faced the west. Naturally, there were several blue bays with clear waters. The sound of a zither came from the other side of the bay. It was very pleasant to listen to, but it could not distract the people here. People stared at the big chessboard hanging down from the second floor and discussed it with their companions attentively. From time to time, they would exclaim that it was wonderful, and they would praise it. Of course, sometimes they would also hear angry criticism. Jingjiu wasn't used to such a noisy and lively environment, so he insisted on watching for a while. Zhao Liu bought him a booklet about playing chess the day before. He read through it and memorized the rules and the method of determining the winner. Yet, words were inanimate. One could only have a true understanding of the game by watching it with one's own eyes. How much do you understand? Zhao Liu asked. Jingjiu said, I don't think it's too difficult. We could try. Zhao Liu said, I told you that day at the Sea God Temple that this is the easiest thing for you. Jingjiu smiled, saying, then I'll go. Zhao Liu nodded, saying go and win. The registration procedure was very simple. Jingjiu was taken to a quiet corner, and his opponent was already sitting on the opposite side of the table. Except for the conical hat he was wearing, there was nothing eye-catching about the table, so no one paid attention to him. Only the crisp sound of chess pieces falling on the chessboard could be heard. It didn't take long for the game to end. Jingjiu stood up and nodded. His opponent was a young man, a disciple of an unknown sect. His face was red, and his eyes were full of dissatisfaction and annoyance. They were all cultivation practitioners, so they could tell the outcome of the game at a glance. Without counting, the young disciple knew he had lost by 3 points. The gap between victory and defeat was very small, or he could have won if he had been more careful in the middle game. What really made him feel unreconciled was that Jingjiu's moves were very jerky, like a beginner's, and he didn't even seem to understand the simplest jōzeki. At the beginning, he thought he would easily win a big victory. Because he didn't want to hurt his opponent's confidence, he deliberately took a few slow steps. Who would have thought that the situation would be so reversed in the end? He had lost inexplicably. Until the last piece was placed, he still couldn't figure out how he had lost. A steward of the Western Sea Sword School came to make a record and led Jingjiu to another place. Like before, his opponent was already waiting for him at the opposite side of the table. It was a middle-aged man with an indifferent expression. The middle-aged man looked at him and said with a smile, "You're lucky." Jingjiu glanced at him, feeling a little surprised. The order of the game has been arranged long ago, but unfortunately, your luck ends here. The middle-aged man pointed to a piece of paper pasted in the corridor and said, "I'm a very cautious person, and I won't make the same mistake as the little guy just now." To be able to get the treasure of the Western Sea Sword School through the so-called leisure activities of zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting was an opportunity not to be missed for many cultivation practitioners who were not talented in cultivation, but good at it. The middle-aged man was such a person. He had investigated very clearly and found that the talented young man from Zhongzhou School had not signed up at all. There was no decent opponent in today's chess competition, so he was full of confidence in getting the treasure. At the same time, as he said, he was also very cautious. His previous game ended early, and he carefully observed the game between Jing Jiao and the young man, confirming that there was a great gap between Jing Jiao's chess skills and his own. As long as he didn't make any mistakes, there was no possibility of him losing. Without saying anything, Jing Jiao picked up a black piece and placed it on the chessboard. For him, this was a very natural action. Playing chess was not chatting, but for those Go players who had been immersed in this game for many years, it seemed a little impolite. The middle-aged man frowned, a little displeased. The sea breeze blew gently, lifting the white gauze curtain and bringing a fresh breath. The sound of the chess pieces falling stopped. Jing Jiao put down the teacup in his hand and didn't make any sound. It was quiet. The middle-aged man slammed the chess piece in his hand on the table, stood up, and left with a flick of his sleeve. Jing Jiao won. The whole process was very similar to the situation of the first game. His play was really similar to that of a beginner, or even worse. It was obvious that he didn't understand any Joziki, and even seemed to be unreasonable. But as the game progressed, he was able to gain a little advantage in those small details, gradually gaining an advantage until he finally won, even if it was only a win of 2 or 3 points. Just like the young man, the middle-aged man didn't understand where he had made a mistake until the end. The administrator of the Western Sea Sword School came over and finished taking notes. Finally, he couldn't help but glance at Jing Jiao. The middle-aged man who had left with a flick of his sleeve was a very ordinary loose cultivator, but he was somewhat famous in the world of chess. The Western Sea Sword School had been paying attention to him for a long time, but they didn't expect him to lose to this guy in the bamboo hat. Jing Jiao got up and prepared to leave. The administrator motioned for him to sit down and then gave him a new cup of tea. This time, all he needed to do was sit at the table and wait for his opponent to come. Chapter 85. The sea breeze continued to blow, and the tea in the cup was replaced. Jing Jiao won 2 more games in a row. At this time, he finally caught the attention of many people. It was because his bamboo hat was really eye-catching in the pavilion, and also because he had won several games in a row. The most surprising thing was his speed. Although the Four Seas banquet had a time limit, his chess moves were too fast. Especially in the recent game, his opponent was a famous chess master in Haijiao. He was not a cultivator, but was invited by the Western Sea Sword School to participate in the Four Seas banquet because of his devotion to Taoism. Who would have thought that he would still lose, and in such an inexplicable way? The caretaker of the West Ocean Sword sect knew how to play Go, and he was the only one who had watched all of Jing Jiao's games from beginning to end, so he was amazed. In the beginning, Jing Jiao's Go playing was not very skillful, even worse than a beginner's, but as the games went on, he became more and more proficient, and sometimes his Go playing was even more marvelous. It seemed that his Go playing skill had improved a lot in such a short time. It was unclear how he did it. Calculation. After looking at the records of the first few games, someone finally realized something. He gasped and said, "This guy's arithmetic ability is too strong." Obviously, he was a newbie. In the beginning, some of his moves were even a little ridiculous, but he always won. Why? This was because his deduction and calculation abilities were too strong. As long as he didn't make any fatal mistakes in the beginning, he could start fighting from the middle of the game and continuously gain benefits from those small battles. In the end, he could completely reverse the disadvantage he had at the beginning and not give his opponent any chance. But even if he was a cultivator, who was better than ordinary people in all aspects, there was a limit to one's strength. Who could completely calculate such a complicated situation on the chessboard? It was unheard of that one could win chess with only calculation ability. No one believed that Jing Jiao could keep winning. Besides, even if he could win a few games in such a way, what was the point? No matter how strict the time limit of the Four Seas banquet was, chess was always the slowest. He only needed to play a piece for the zither, write a few words for the calligraphy, and draw was a little more troublesome, but it was just a game. Apart from chess, the results of the other 3 events were soon out. Shui Yu Nunnery's M.O., she had the best zither skills. She was the disciple of the nunnery master. Attending the Four Seas banquet was already a great honor for the Western Sea Sword School. She played a piece of music in person, which was a great honor. It would be a problem if she couldn't get first place in the Guqin skills competition. Of course, her music was indeed beautiful. Everyone in the pavilion on Lonely Mountain who had heard that song could testify. The Zhongzhou school was considered by many cultivation practitioners to be the #1 sect in the world. The disciple participating in the Four Seas banquet this time was called Xiang Wanshu. Xiang Wanshu was a famous talented youth, and it was said that his magic methods were taught by his big brother Tong Yin. Zhongzhou school had given Western Sea Sword School enough face, so Western Sea Sword School naturally knew what to do. This is a true master of calligraphy and painting. The cultivators stood in front of the building, admiring the central hall painting and the meticulous flower and bird painting beside it. Xiang Wanshu walked out of the building. People came up to him to express their admiration. Xiang Wanshu's expression was calm, and he responded with a smile, like the spring breeze. Only the other side hadn't gotten the result yet. The sounds of discussion and even quarreling could be heard in the distant pavilion. It was rare to see such a lively scene in a gathering of the cultivation world. Xiang Wanshu was curious, and he walked toward the pavilion surrounded by the crowd. When he arrived in front of the pavilion, someone had already announced his identity. The crowd parted like the tide, letting him walk to the front. An enlarged chessboard was hung in the pavilion, with many chess pieces on it. The game seemed to be in a stalemate. Looking at the chessboard, Xiang Wanshu raised his eyebrows slightly, then shook his head, as if he didn't understand. "Why did Immortal Master Wanshu shake his head?" someone asked. Xiang Wanshu smiled faintly, but didn't say anything. The disciples of Zhongzhou school paid particular attention to moderation and wouldn't talk about others easily. He thought that Haizhou was after all a small and remote county. Though the Four Seas banquet was a big event, it didn't have any outstanding figures. For example, he had drawn a flower and bird painting and written a few words and received so much praise. If these people saw the calligraphy and paintings of the scholars of Yamatai at the Plum meeting a few years ago, what would they think? Another example would be the last game of the chess tournament. The two players in the building should be the best chess players in the Four Seas banquet, but their chess moves were so bad, even crude. If they were in the Plum meeting, they would have been eliminated in the first round. Not to mention his big brother or himself. Even his young brother would have one. As he was thinking about all this, a sound came from inside the building. The winner of the last game had been decided. Jing Jiu stood up and walked to the back of the screen, preparing to wash his hands. The caretakers of the Western Sea Sword School and some other people in the building looked at his back, not knowing what to say. The crowd had a strange feeling. No matter how they looked at it, this person hadn't played chess for a long time. So how could he have one? Because of this feeling, the atmosphere was a bit weird. No one spoke, and no one congratulated him. It was a bit awkward for a while. Suddenly, a voice came from the crowd outside the building. "Immortal Master Wanshu, what do you think of this person's chess skills?" Xiang Wanshu's gaze shifted slightly, and he found the speaker. It was a thin and tall old man. For some reason, his face was full of resentment and anger. Xiang Wanshu said, "My chess skills are very ordinary, so I'm not qualified to comment on this cultivation brother." The thin and tall old man was the chess master of Haizhou, who had lost to Jing Jiu. He still couldn't believe that he had lost until now. The thin and tall old man wasn't a cultivation practitioner, but he knew something about the Zhongzhou school for some reason. Perhaps he was too angry because he couldn't understand the situation, or perhaps he had some evil intentions. He brought up the question. He didn't try to hide it. He squeezed through the crowd and came before Xiang Wanshu, saying, "Immortal Master, you don't have to be so modest. I heard that even young Master Tong Yin only gave you a handicap of 3 pieces." There was an uproar in the crowd upon hearing this. If one were named the most famous genius in the cultivation world, the name Tong Yin would be the first to come to mind. Even Zhuo Ruzhui, the personal disciple of the sect master of Aoyama's sect, couldn't compare to him in some aspects. Tong Yin's talent in cultivation was the best in Zhongzhou, and he was still the idol of many people. In addition to this, Tang Yin was also famous for his Go-playing skill. A few years ago, he had won the first prize 3 times in a row at the Plum meeting. Even those scholars in Yamatai were convinced of his achievements. There is another saying that Tang Yin had been trying to comprehend the heavenly law through chess. No matter how one looked at it, Tang Yin was undoubtedly the best chess player in the world. He only gave Xiang Wanshu a handicap of 3 pieces. The crowd looked at Xiang Wanshu with more respect and fear in their eyes. It was a bit too humble for him to say that his chess skills were ordinary. If the immortal master Wanshu had participated in the chess tournament today, he wouldn't be a master of calligraphy and painting, but a master of chess, calligraphy, and painting. Xiang Wanshu said with a bitter smile, "Compared to my big brother, my chess skills are like a candle flame in front of a pearl, and so are my calligraphy and painting skills. I don't deserve such praise." The thin and tall elder didn't give up, insisting, "But you are definitely qualified to comment on today's chess game. Please tell us what is going on in this game. What is wrong with this person? How could he win if he played such an ugly game?" For those who love chess, the shape of the chess game was very important. Besides winning or losing, they also had to pay attention to the aesthetics of the game. Jing Jiu's chess playing was completely unsystematic, so it was even less aesthetically pleasing. Xiang Wanshu felt a bit awkward about this, but he still didn't want to criticize Jing Jiu. This cultivation friend has an amazing calculating ability, but his game is a bit ugly, he said. "Yeah, I told you it's ugly. It's like cutting grass and picking dung. Who plays chess like that?" The thin and tall elder suddenly became excited, yelling, "Even if he can win for a while by playing like this, can he keep winning?" Due to the influence of Tang Yin, the disciples of Zhongzhou school respected the chess playing very much, which was why Xiang Wanshu was willing to do the semi-cursive calligraphy and painting, but not participate in the chess tournament. In his eyes, the arrangement of the Four Seas banquet was a bit disrespectful to the chess game. Xiang Wanshu thought what the thin and tall elder said was too harsh, but he agreed with him. "If I played like this, I would be beaten by my big brother for sure," he said with a smile. There was a burst of laughter in the crowd. A cold voice suddenly came from outside the crowd. "The Zhongzhou school is just like what the rumors say, polite, hypocritical, and annoying." Hearing this, the crowd was shocked, wondering who would dare say such a thing in front of the talented disciples of the Zhongzhou school. In all of Chaotian, Yamatai kept a low profile. Guoqing Temple didn't compete, and the Western Sea Sword School wouldn't cause any trouble at their home ground. Could it be someone from the Windy Broadsword Church or the Aoyama sect? Chapter 86. Thinking that the winner was also wearing a conical hat, the crowd suddenly realized that this young girl was that person's companion, and that was why she said such a thing. Xiang Wanshu asked, "Please tell me, how am I being hypocritical?" His expression was calm, devoid of anger, but giving off a sense of oppression. He had a mild temperament and didn't want to cause trouble, but someone insulted his sect, so how could he not speak up? It suddenly became quiet, and the atmosphere was a bit tense. The young girl standing by the cliff's edge was none other than Zhao Leu. Looking at Xiang Wanshu, she said nonchalantly, "You said that if you played like this, your big brother would beat you. Does that mean that he should be beaten for playing like this?" This statement seemed a bit forced, but if one thought about what Xiang Wanshu had said earlier, it would be the same. Xiang Wanshu raised his eyebrows slightly, asking, "What do you mean by hypocritical?" Zhao Leu said, "You think he's bad at playing chess, but you don't want to admit it. You even want to beat him, but you don't dare do it. This is hypocrisy." Xiang Wanshu shook his head, saying, "It's not hypocrisy. I just want to save some face for your companion." "Do you think you're qualified to judge him?" Zhao Leu asked. There was a slight commotion in the crowd, thinking that what she said was ridiculous. The person who was given 3 moves when playing chess with Tang Yin was of course qualified to judge her companion. Xiang Wanshu raised his eyebrows slightly, saying, "That's right. I want to tell him that playing chess is not so simple. Believe me, for him, playing chess is the simplest thing in the world," Zhao Leu said. When she said this, she thought, if you saw the porcelain plate next to the bamboo chair, if you saw the gravel in the porcelain plate, you would understand what she meant. Xiang Wanshu said, "Really? I hope I will have a chance to learn from him later." "You can't do it. Let your big brother do it." Zhao Leiyu's tone was natural, as if she were talking about something normal. There was an uproar in the crowd. The Western Sea Sword School held the Four Seas Banquet to compete with the Plum Meeting, but everybody knew that the Four Seas Banquet and the Plum Meeting had an insurmountable gap in terms of resources and other aspects. Do you think that just because your companion won first place in the Four Seas Banquet, he is qualified to play chess with Tong Yin? Who was Tong Yin? Was it something that ordinary cultivators could see? Xiang Wanshu didn't know what to say, smiling bitterly, thinking that she was an ignorant little girl. His anger subsided, and he didn't pay any more attention to her. An hour later, Xiang Wanshu saw the little girl again. The winners of the Four Seas Banquet, as well as the invited guests, would board a sea boat from the lonely mountain to the cloud platform in the sky. Xiang Wanshu could of course use the magic method to go up in the air, but he chose to wait here out of respect for the Western Sea Sword School. He looked at the edge of the cliff, and his gaze fell on the bamboo hats of the two people. He shook his head, wondering which sect they were spoiled disciples. "How do you feel? Is it interesting?" Zhao Leiyu asked. "Not much," replied Jingjiu. Zhao Leiyu asked, "What do you mean?" "Playing chess is not about one's own cultivation, but winning by relying on the opponent's mistakes. It's boring." He added after some thought, "And it's too simple." The sea boat had no sails, rising with the wind. Soon, it left the ground and sailed into the clouds. Amidst the lingering clouds, one could vaguely see the jagged cliffs and the pavilions that were right in front of them. Some of the cultivation practitioners who visited the Western Sea Sword School for the first time found out that the cloud platform was actually a mountain suspended in the air in the clouds. The sea boat stopped atop the peak. The disciples of the Western Sea Sword School came forward and led the guests into a magnificent palace hall. The invited guests of various sects were already seated in the hall, enjoying the mermaids' song and dance, discussing something in low voices. Xiang Wanshu, Mo Shi, and Jingjiu walked into the hall as the winners of the Four Seas Banquet. Many people stood up to greet them, showing their respect for the Four Seas Banquet, as well as for the sects of Xiang Wanshu and Mo Shi. Some gazes fell on Jingjiu, who was still wearing the conical hat when he came into the hall, looking a bit weird. Among these gazes, one was hidden in the dark, full of evil and hatred. Another two gazes were full of shock and confusion. Yao Songshan and Lin Yingliang of the Aoyama sect changed their expressions slightly, wondering why he was here. Didn't he know the Pure Heaven Bureau was looking for them? What was he going to do? As they came to the deep end of the hall, a figure emerged from the clouds and fog. It was a tall man with a dignified temperament, wearing a bright yellow cloth. A dozen beaded curtains hung in front of his crown, obscuring his face. He looked down at Jingjiu like a real emperor. This was Shi Wang's son, the most mysterious figure in the cultivation circle in recent years. Jingjiu looked at him in silence. Xiang Wanshu and Mo, she had already returned to the front hall, wondering what kind of treasures the Western Sea Sword School had given them. Jingjiu was the only one here, which was a bit weird. The path to heaven is boundless, so we have to take a broader view. We can't give up the whole forest just because of one tree. Shi Wang's son's voice was very gentle, like the round and flawless pearls of the South Ocean on the beaded curtains. The first half of this statement was like a common advice from a master to a junior, but the second half was quite odd. Jingjiu thought silently that he was not him. By now, he knew who Shi Wang's son was, and he also knew who he was not. Shi Wang's son looked at Jingjiu with a faint smile. It was interesting that he also thought he knew who this young cultivation practitioner wearing the conical hat was. He thought that this young cultivation practitioner should have participated in the Four Seas Banquet and come to join him because he was pursued by the imperial court. He knew what had happened in the Sea God Temple that night, but he didn't feel angry. On the contrary, he appreciated their courage and ability, feeling that these two young people had the potential to be cultivated, though the one in front of him with the iron sword on his back obviously hadn't entered the state of the undefeated and was far inferior to the other. However, he wouldn't let the Western Sea Sword School accept them. He would do it under another name. That was why he said the second half of his statement. It was quiet, and Jing Jiao didn't respond. Shi Wang's son narrowed his eyes, showing a cruel expression. "If you don't want to join me, why did you come to participate in my Four Seas banquet?" he asked. "I just wanted to see you," Jing Jiao said. This was an unexpected answer. Shi Wang's son looked at him in silence, and suddenly asked, "Do you still want my treasures?" Jing Jiao shook his head. Hearing this, Shi Wang's son thought Jing Jiao hadn't made up his mind yet and wanted to show his friendliness. After a moment of silence, he waved his hand to signal Jing Jiao to leave. The Grand Hall of the Western Sea Sword School was very spacious, with a radius of 3,000 feet. The thin mist moved along the ground, and the guests sat scattered in the hall. If it weren't for the keen eyesight of cultivators, they wouldn't even be able to see each other's faces clearly. Jing Jiao returned to the Grand Hall and walked to the table where Zhao Liu was sitting, ready to leave with her. A gloomy voice rang out. "Wearing a conical hat at the banquet? Are you so shameful? Or have you done so many evil things that you don't dare to show your faces?" The guests were a bit surprised. They looked toward the source of the voice and found it was a skinny middle-aged cultivator in a black Taoist robe with a wretched face. A cultivator who knew this person whispered something to the guests. Then the guests learned that this middle-aged cultivator was the free-traveling cultivator, Zhu Jie. It was said that this person had a good relationship with the Western Sea Sword School, so it wasn't surprising that he appeared at the Four Seas banquet today. Zhu Jie had the same bad reputation as his deceased elder brother, Zhu Guwei, the head monk of the Black Dragon Temple. Naturally, no one wanted to talk to him. Normally, he would finish the banquet and then boast about how the Western Sea Sword School treated him well, and how he could chat and laugh with the talented disciples of Zhongzhou School. But today was different. Chapter 87. It was the suggestion of the Pure Heaven Bureau that Zhu Jie stood out to provoke them. The Pure Heaven Bureau had already arranged the magic army to guard the surroundings of the Lone Mountain, but they were worried that they would escape by riding their swords, so they decided to do it on the cloud platform. There were many cultivation swordsmen here, and the number of swordsmen from the Western Sea Sword School was even greater. The only thing that worried the Pure Heaven Bureau was that the Western Sea Sword School might be displeased by the disruption of the Four Seas banquet. As such, the best way to deal with them was to find a way to provoke them. As long as they attacked first, the Western Sea Sword School couldn't blame the imperial court, and they might even help them. The best candidate was, of course, Zhu Jie, because he had a good relationship with the Western Sea Sword School, so he could speak freely in the Grand Hall, and his words were really unpleasant. Or is it because you're too ugly? Did someone cut your face a few times with a knife when you were a child and disfigured you? Of course, it's also possible that you're so beautiful that you don't want others to see your face. Take off your conical hat. I like pretty girls. If I like you, I'll take good care of you. Zhu Jie kept on talking, his words extremely frivolous and humiliating. The cultivation practitioners in the Grand Hall felt it strange, thinking how vulgar his words were. Even if he had a good relationship with the Western Sea Sword School, he shouldn't be afraid of offending the master by making such a scene. As for why he was so confident his brother was dead and the royal concubine didn't have a good relationship with him, Zhao Liu remained silent and didn't retort no matter how he insulted her. Nobody noticed that the two disciples of the Aoyama sect had terrible expressions on their faces. Yao Songzhan of Liangwang Peak narrowed his eyes and raised his eyebrows, ready to kill someone. Xiang Wanshu of the Zhongzhou School and Mo Shi of Shuai Nunnery were sitting next to the Aoyama sect, and they noticed the change in Yao Songshan's energy, their expressions a bit grave. "Little girl." Zhu Jie kept on insulting Zhao Liu, full of malice and mockery. Suddenly, his voice stopped abruptly. Suddenly, a bright red light appeared in the spacious and empty hall. There was a faint smell of blood in the fragrant air. There was a hole in Zhu Jie's throat, and blood gushed out like a waterfall. The flying sword pierced through the air and returned to Zhao Lei, disappearing into her palm. Only then did Zhu Jie realize what had happened. His eyes were filled with shock and despair as he covered his throat with both hands. Blood flowed out from between his fingers. The scene was extremely tragic. No one could save his life. Zhu Jie's face was pale, and he slowly knelt on the ground. He let out a few sounds like broken bellows, and just like that, he stopped breathing. The hall was in an expanse of shock. Many cultivators stood up and looked over with the intention of seeing exactly what had happened. Countless gazes fell on Zhao Lei. Other than shock, there was also a lot of fear. She was more than 1,000 feet away from Zhu Jie, yet she was able to kill him with one strike. Moreover, the sword was hidden in her palm. According to the most popular state classification of Aoyama sect in the southern continent, didn't that mean she had already entered the middle state of the undefeated? Xiang Wanshu and Mo, she glanced at each other, seeing the shock in each other's eyes. This young woman with the conical hat should be about the same age as them, but her state was actually higher than theirs? Who was she? And what kind of sword was that flying sword of hers? How could it have such a terrifying, lethal intent? How dare you commit murder in public, in broad daylight? An angry voice rang out outside the hall. The officials of the Pure Heaven Bureau had finally appeared. Seeing Zhu Jie lying in a pool of blood, Shi Fengqian's face turned livid, his heart heavy. Zhu Jie had done what he had asked, and successfully enraged his opponent, but he couldn't stop her from killing him. This made Shi Fengqian feel a sense of defeat that he had never felt before, and he was extremely angry. Shi Fengqian took a deep breath to calm himself down, and said to the cultivators in the hall, "I want all the immortal masters to know that this murderer with the conical hat is a wanted criminal by the imperial court. She has killed nearly 100 people in the last 2 years, and has done many evil deeds. Don't let her escape." The cultivation practitioners who had attended the meeting of the Pure Heaven Bureau in Haizhou City were the first to react. They stood up from their seats, calling out their swords and magic treasures. The hall was filled with green lights, full of lethal intent. Xiang Wanshu looked at Zhao Lei, raising his eyebrows slightly, as if he didn't expect this young woman to be an evil person. Mo, she's gaze also fell on her, her willowy eyebrows furrowed, showing a disgusted expression. To the surprise of the officials of the Pure Heaven Bureau and the cultivation practitioners, the 2 monk doctors of the Guoqing Temple didn't move, neither did Zui Yushi of Ozawa. Even more surprisingly, Yao Song's Han didn't move either. Wasn't he the immortal master of Liangwang Peak of the Aoyama sect famous for his warlike and hatred of evildoers? Zhao Lei killed Zhu Jie with one swing of her sword from a distance of more than 300 yards. Her cultivation state was indeed very high, but there were too many swordsmen in the hall, such as Elder He Zhicheng of Kunlun, Xiang Wanshu, and the others. Not to mention that this was the home court of the Western Sea Sword School, and the elder sitting in the main seat was a highly achieved swordsman in the state of free travel. Normally, Zhao Lei couldn't kill Zhu Jie under such circumstances. Her attack was too sudden. Others could kill without saying a word, but she could kill without saying a word. Most importantly, no one would have thought that she would dare to use her sword to kill someone in this place. This was the Cloudy Platform, an important place of the Western Sea Sword School. Though the formation had been suspended because of the Four Seas banquet, killing someone here was tantamount to provoking the Western Sea Sword School. The elder of the Western Sea Sword School looked at Zhao Lei coldly, and the powerful, piercing discernment had already enveloped her. Shi Wang's son still didn't show up, nor did he make a sound. Nobody knew that this mysterious swordsman of the Western Sea was observing everything in the deep end of the hall in silence. Everything was under his control. He wanted to see how the 2 young men with conical hats would deal with the current situation, and then he would let them go. "You will pay for the blood debt of the sect masters of 3 today." He Zhicheng, the elder of the Kunlun sect, stood up slowly and said to Zhao Lei. As soon as he finished speaking, an extremely sharp full moon whizzed through the air, chopping toward Zhao Liu with an extremely fierce killing intent. Suddenly, a flying sword flew up from below. The flying sword was shining brightly, and its speed was so fast that it looked like a perfectly straight blue line. A loud clang. The full moon was chopped by the flying sword from below and flew back to the elder of the Kunlun sect at an angle, spinning in the air and making a whining sound. The elder of the Kunlun sect had a ruddy face, and his hair and beard were all standing on end. Blood trickled down from the corner of his mouth, and he looked a little embarrassed. The flying sword was indeed powerful, but the state of the swordsman was not higher than his, so he was unprepared and suffered a loss. Chapter 88. It was surprising enough that the disciple of Liangwang Peak of the Aoyama sect didn't attack the demoness first. Who would have thought that when the Kunlun elders intended to kill the other party, he would actually help the demoness with his sword? What was going on? Shi Fengshan stared at Yao Songzhan, his eyes full of shock and anger. As he was about to ask, he suddenly thought of a possibility, his expression changing abruptly. The subordinate official of the Pure Heaven Bureau didn't think of what Shi Fengshan had thought of, his face turning pale with fright. "Immortal Master Yao, what are you doing?" The elder of Kunlun came back to his senses and said sternly, "I know those senior masters of the sect of three acted improperly in Chounan City and offended the Aoyama sect, but everybody saw this demoness kill Immortal Master Zhu Jia with their own eyes. Do you think the Aoyama sect will protect her? Zhu Jia was rude to my senior master, so he deserves to die." Yao Songzhan walked forward slowly, looking at the elder of Kunlun, and said nonchalantly, "As for you, you dared attack my senior master. You have a death wish." It was deathly quiet in the grand hall. The green cloth worn by Yao Songzhan fluttered in the ocean wind, making him look like an immortal. The crowd wondered if they had heard what he said clearly. "Rude to my senior master? Dared attack my senior master? Senior master? What senior master?" Yao Songzhan was the 11th disciple of Liangwang Peak. So who was his senior master? Countless gazes fell on Zhao Liu. Zhao Liu took off her conical hat. Regrettably, they didn't get to see her beautiful black hair flowing down like a waterfall. This young girl had short hair and a pair of short but powerful eyebrows. The reason why it was said to be powerful was because her eyebrows were thick, as if they were painted with the thickest ink. More and more people guessed her identity. They were shocked speechless, standing up one after another. The sound of tables being overturned could be heard everywhere in the grand hall. In the cultivation world, Zhao Liu was very famous. She was even close to catching up to Lo Huainan, Tong Yin, Bai Zhao, Ruzhui, and others. She was an innate Dao seed. Before she was even born, she was already the target of Aoyama's sex protection. 3 years ago, in the inherited sword competition in Aoyama, she surprised everyone by allowing Shinma Peak to continue the inheritance and became the second disciple of Zhenren Jingyang, which shocked the entire cultivation world. Her appearance and temperament had already been discussed countless times in the various sections. This short-haired girl had picturesque eyebrows and distinct black and white eyes. The disciples of Liangwang Peak addressed her as senior master. Who else could she be but Zhao Liu? Everybody stood up, no matter how they felt about the Green Mountain sect and Zhao Liu, or how they felt at the moment. Mo Shi, a disciple of Shuai Nunnery, also stood up. She found that Zhao Liu looked like a girl with a delicate and pretty face, nothing special about her. She couldn't help but look down on her. But in the next moment, she thought of the bloody sword that had pierced through the grand hall, and her expression changed slightly, feeling ashamed of her inferiority. Xiang Wanshu was surprised. He didn't expect the girl he had met on the Lone Mountain to be the rumored Zhao Liu. In the minds of the disciples of Zhongzhou School, Zhao Liu was different from the talented disciples of other sections. Zhao Liu was from Zhaoga. According to the saying that all the talented disciples of Zhaoga would enter the center sect, she should have joined Zhongzhou School. In that case, she should have been his big sister or young sister. The masters of Zhongzhou School had tried hard for 10 years to change the Zhao family's mind, but the Aoyama sect was too strict. These stories have been circulating in Zhongzhou school for a long time. So many disciples, including Xiang Wanshu, were curious about Zhao Leiyu. They also had an indescribable feeling, a feeling of intimacy, and also a feeling of resistance. Most of the young disciples regarded her as an imaginary enemy. It was still quiet in the grand hall, and it was hard for people to calm down. Some of them noticed the person standing by Zhao Leiyu. If this girl was Zhao Leiyu, then who was the person wearing the conical hat? Judging from the iron sword, this person hadn't entered the undefeated state yet, and was much weaker than Zhao Leiyu. Was he Jingjiu? After the inherited sword of Shinma Peak, Jingjiu had gained some fame in the cultivation circle, though he was far less famous than Zhao Leiyu. Yet, in some people's minds, he was even more famous than Zhao Leiyu, because it was rumored that he was an exceptionally handsome man. Jingjiu had no intention of taking off the conical hat, which made the female cultivation practitioners, including Mo Shi, feel a bit regretful. "Oh, it's the master of Shinma Peak of Aoyama. Please forgive me for not welcoming you earlier." As a gentle voice rang out, a cloud and fog came up from the deep end of the grand hall, and a tall figure walked out slowly from the fog. The mysterious Shiwang's son had finally shown up in front of the world. Shiwang's son was forced to show up. Zhao Leiyu was the master of Shinma Peak, an important figure in Aoyama's sect. Moreover, she was the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang. In terms of seniority and status, she was the most powerful person in the Grand Hall today. The elders of Western Sea Sword School and Kunlun had the same seniority as her, but their status in the cultivation circle was far lower than hers. On the cloud platform, only Shiwang's son's status could be considered equal to hers, so he had to come out and welcome her in person to show his respect to Aoyama's sect. Before Shiwang's son showed up, the elder of the Western Sea Sword School in the state of free travel had withdrawn his sword discernment, just as Zhao Leiyu had revealed her identity. If he had withdrawn his sword discernment a bit slower, he would have been regarded as disrespectful to Aoyama's sect, which might have led to a dispute. Shiwang's son greeted Zhao Leiyu with a smile, and then looked at Jingjiu beside her. Thinking of what Jingjiu had said when they met earlier, a ferocious glint flashed in the deep end of his eyes. At this moment, he was sure that Jingjiu didn't want to seek refuge with Western Sea Sword School. At that time, Jingjiu said to him, "I just want to see you." "See what?" Did Aoyama sect know about the Dace Devil and send their disciples to investigate? Thinking of this, even he was a bit vigilant. But he didn't worry too much, because he believed that no matter how hard Aoyama's sect investigated, even if they found all the way to West Sea through the Dace Devil, they still wouldn't find any evidence. The layout of the Dace Devil was not deliberately arranged, and it was only aimed at the ambition of the cultivation practitioners. Thinking that the disciple with natural Tao quality of Aoyama's sect had eaten the monster pill 2 years ago, Shiwang's son showed an enigmatic smile. A monster pill, which could help the cultivation practitioners improve their state, and a cultivation method that could erase the traces of Dan poison, was a temptation that no cultivation practitioner could resist. The more talented they were, the more pressure and expectations they had to bear, and the more they couldn't resist the temptation. Looking at Jingjiu and Zhao Leiyu, Shiwang's son thought with a smile, "Go ahead and investigate. The more serious you are, the better. It would be best if you could find out who your talented disciple is." Jingjiu was thinking about something else. After Zhao Leiyu revealed her identity, Shiwang's son showed up to welcome her in person. If he had known it would be so easy, he wouldn't have played those games of chess on a lonely mountain. It seemed that after countless years of cultivation and traveling, he was still not experienced enough in this aspect. "What about you? Didn't you say that you were good at scheming?" He looked at Zhao Leiyu beside him and shook his head, thinking that she was indeed a disciple of Shinma Peak, but she was a bit stupid in this aspect. At this moment, a voice rang out. At first, that person's voice trembled slightly, and it was unclear whether he was angry or uneasy, but it soon became steady, firm, and unbreakable. "Do you think that just because you're a big shot of Aoyama's sect, you can kill people at will?" Chapter 89. Zhao Lei glanced at him but didn't say anything. In the eyes of the crowd, she looked extremely indifferent. That's right. The elder of Kunlun said angrily. That day in Chaonan City, the disciples of the sect of three competed for the medicine for the injury of a fellow disciple. It was just a trivial dispute. How could they die? Hearing this, many people looked at Zhao Lei with a hint of fear. Even though she was the 9th peak master of the Aoyama sect, how could she be so cruel? Thinking of the scene where Zhao Lei killed Zhu Jie without saying a word, the crowd felt that this rumored genius girl had a terrifying temperament. Just a trivial matter? Lin Yingliang walked forward and sneered at the elder of Kunlun. That day, the two highly achieved monks of the Guocheng Temple wanted to use the medicine to cure the residents of Chaonan City who were frightened by the Dace Devil. The practitioners and the rich merchants in the Precious Tree House all gave up bidding for the medicine and were willing to help. However, the disciples of the sect of three tried to stop the young master from getting the medicine because he was poisoned by the flowers and felt itchy. Relying on the wealth of Kunlun, they increased the price of the medicine. Senior Master Zhao couldn't stand this behavior, so she bought the Borneal with a Xianqiao pill and wanted to give it to the two highly achieved monks of the Guocheng Temple. But she was stopped by the disciples of the sect of three who wanted to steal the medicine. They didn't know my senior master's identity, and they even wanted to kill him. They deserved to die. Lin Yingliang and his big brother Yao Songzhan had learned about this incident in the immortal house of Haizhou a few days ago. Comparing it with the files of the Pure Heaven Bureau, they figured out what had happened. Now that he told the story, it was almost the same as the truth, causing a heated discussion in the Grand Hall. The old monk of the Guocheng Temple uttered a Zen chant and said to the crowd, "This poor monk was at the Precious Tree House at the time, and many practitioners can testify." Hearing this, the crowd in the Grand Hall believed 90% of the story. The reputation of the Guocheng Temple in the world was impeccable, and everybody believed that the old monk wouldn't lie. The elder of the Kunlun Immortal Sect wanted to say that nobody had seen Zhao Lei kill someone in the alley, so nobody knew what was going on. But judging from the atmosphere in the Grand Hall, he knew it was useless to say so he couldn't help but feel angry. What about the others? Shi Fengshen took a few more steps forward, getting closer to Zhao Lei. He stared into Zhao Lei's eyes and said, "In Shangzhou City, 4 passers-by were killed by your sword. The one you beheaded outside Tianjing City was a divine guard. The one you chopped into pieces in Yuzhou City was an old woman. I want to know how they offended the Peak Lord. How could they offend the Peak Master?" Zhao Lei raised her eyebrows and was about to say something. Jing Jiu glanced at her. The Peak Master of Aoyama was rendered speechless by an official of the imperial court. No one believed it. Many people thought that Zhao Lei refused to defend herself because it was beneath her dignity to argue with this official of the imperial court. However, they did not know that it was because Jing Jiu found it troublesome. Those people didn't offend the senior master, but they must have offended the sword of Aoyama. Yao Songzhan looked at Shi Fengshen and said coldly, "The sword cries when it encounters injustice. I think you know better than anyone else why those people died by the senior master's sword." Shi Fengshen sneered. "In the last 2 years, the Peak Master has traveled around the world and killed more than 70 people. Don't you need to give us an explanation?" Yao Songzhan looked at this official of the imperial court as if he was looking at a rock. "Our Aoyama sword sect has killed a few evildoers, and we need an explanation? Who is qualified to ask us for an explanation?" What a domineering statement. What sharp sword. It was deathly quiet in the Grand Hall. Since the Aoyama sect had said so, who would dare oppose it? "Big brother, what you said is inappropriate. Even if you draw your sword when it encounters injustice, it's still a matter of life and death. We should be cautious." It was Xiang Wanshu who spoke. She also shook his head and said, "This is a bit too reckless." The atmosphere in the Grand Hall had changed subtly. It was interesting that the disciples of the Zhongzhou school and Shui Yu nunnery spoke at the same time. Among the major cultivation sects in the world, Yamatai kept a low profile. Guocheng Temple didn't want to compete. The The Windy Broadsword sect and the Western Sea Sword School didn't have enough resources, so the Zhongzhou School and Aoyama sect were the most orthodox sections. Since the Zhongzhou School was located near Zhaoga City, it had many talented disciples in the last few decades, and its reputation had even surpassed that of Aoyama. Shueiyu Nunnery didn't have many disciples, but it had the chief nun and a few elders in the Broken Sea state, and it was said that a legendary figure had a chance to enter the heavenly arrival state, so they couldn't be underestimated. Yao Songzhan was displeased. His displeasure was mostly directed at Mo Shi. If the Zhongzhou school had spoken, he could have rebuked them directly, but Shueiyu Nunnery and the Aoyama sect had always been on good terms, so he didn't know how much he should rebuke them. It was a bit troublesome for him. It was then that Jing Jiao finally spoke. It was the first time the people in the Grand Hall had heard his voice. His voice was calm and mild, like the water flowing over the body of a sword. It was hard to tell whether it was the water or the sword. "Is Lien Sanyue your senior master?" Upon hearing this, there was an uproar in the hall. Mo Shi furrowed her brows, feeling quite angry. Lien Sanyue was the young sister of the sect master of Shueiyu Nunnery, but she was undoubtedly the most powerful person in Shueiyu Nunnery in terms of cultivation state. It was rumored that she was the one who had a chance to enter the heavenly arrival state. She was one of the most powerful swordsmen in the cultivation world, both in terms of seniority and experience. It was said that she greeted the sect master of Aoyama with the same courtesy. Judging from the relationship between the immortal Jingyang and Jingjiao, he was of the same generation as Lien Sanyue, but everybody in the cultivation world knew that he had followed Zhao Liu to the Shinma Peak. Even if they were of the same generation, how rude it was to address such a senior cultivation practitioner by her name. Mo Shi stared at Jingjiao with an unfriendly expression in her eyes, as if she wanted to see through his conical hat and find out how shameless he was. "Do you know why your senior master is called Lien Sanyue?" Jingjiao continued, as if he hadn't sensed anything. Back when the Snowy Kingdom invaded the south, the imperial court was interrupted and the world was in chaos. The populace was destitute, and the people were living in misery and suffering. Moreover, the bandits occupied the roads and used the refugees as their food supply. Your senior master happened to come down from the mountain at that time. She killed 40,000 people in 3 months and burned down 17 bandit strongholds. People said that the flames of war lasted for 3 months. That's how she got her name. It was deathly quiet in the Grand Hall as they listened to the story. The crowd wondered in astonishment if it was true. These events had happened too many times in the past and had become a secret that no one knew about. For instance, Mo Shi had never heard of it before. "What are you talking about?" she retorted reflexively. "My senior master has a gentle temperament. How could she act like this, She suddenly realized that she didn't know how to describe the senior master in this story. It was a legend that she had saved thousands of people from danger, but she had killed 40,000 bandits in 3 months, many of whom were refugees, women, and children who had been kidnapped. How could she comment on this? Though the young cultivation practitioners didn't know about these events, it didn't mean that the cultivation practitioners of the older generation didn't know about them either. The elder of Kunlun fell silent, as he didn't want to recall that chaotic era. The elder of the Western Sea Sword School couldn't help but change his expression slightly when he thought of the bloody ocean. The old monk of the Guocheng Temple shook his head helplessly, indicating to Mo Shi that these stories were true and that she shouldn't talk about them anymore. Mo Shi said anxiously, "Anyway, my senior master only killed evil people." Yao Songzhan sneered. "Are you saying that my senior master only killed good people?" The Aoyama sect killed people to get rid of evil. This was the natural understanding of many cultivation practitioners and most of the common people. This was the confidence or foundation of the orthodox sections. Only the accumulation of countless years of merits could create such an unshakable image. Function knew that he had no way to arrest the culprit. Even if he wanted to risk the condemnation of the whole world by mobilizing the magic army and the swordsmen of the imperial court to investigate the case, he didn't have the confidence to do so. The Western Sea Sword School would definitely remain neutral, and the sects like the Gwechung Temple and Ozawa would definitely stand on the side of the Aoyama sect. Though the Zhongzhou School and Shuei Nunnery had spoken out, if the imperial court and the Aoyama sect were to fight, they would never stand on the side of the imperial court. Moreover, how could an official of his level be qualified to represent the imperial court? I'll report this to the imperial court. He looked at Zhao Liu and said, I'll get an explanation from you, even if it's just an apology, even if he had to pay the price with his life. He thought to himself, Zhao Liu didn't know what this official of the imperial court was thinking, nor did she care about the sad and stirring feeling he had. Did you see him? She asked Jingjiu. Jingjiu nodded. Let's go then, Zhao Liu said. Xiang Wanshu suddenly said, I hope we can meet at the plum meeting. As he said this, he looked at Jingjiu. There would also be zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting at the plum meeting. Next year, Jingjiu would participate in the plum meeting as the representative of the young disciples of the Aoyama sect. Since he won first place in the chess tournament at the Four Seas banquet, he would probably continue to participate in the chess tournament. Zhao Liu said, As I said, you can't do it. Let your big brother do it. Xiang Wanshu's expression changed slightly, but he didn't say anything. Outside the building on the Lone Mountain, Zhao Liu had said the same thing. At the time, he thought she was a spoiled little girl who behaved absurdly, so he didn't pay much attention to her. But she was Zhao Liu, so what she said had nothing to do with absurdity. She really thought so. There was an uproar in the Grand Hall. In the Zhongzhou school, Xiang Wanshu had many big brothers, but the big brother who didn't add his name and was easily known was Tong Yin. What did Zhao Liu mean by saying this? Did she mean to challenge Tong Yin to a duel on behalf of Jingjiu? Were the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school going to face off against each other? Thinking of this, the crowd couldn't help but look forward to it indefinitely. It was believed that the whole land would be shocked when this announcement was heard from the cloud platform. What would happen at the plum meeting next year? Chapter 90. Zhao Liu reached out her right hand. Jingjiu stretched out his left hand. Hold it. The wind picked up. The flying sword pierced through the air. A hole appeared in the clouds, and then it gradually closed up. A faintly discernible red line remained in the air, emitting a faint smell of blood. The two didn't bid farewell to the crowd, and they didn't even say a word to Shiwang's son, which was a bit rude. However, there were too many things that had happened today. The shock in people's hearts hadn't dissipated yet, so they didn't think about this at all. Occasionally, people who thought about it even felt that this was the only way to fit the impression left by the young lady of Shinma Peak. Looking at the red line disappearing in the ocean wind, Xiang Wanshu murmured, Is this the thoughtless sword left by the immortal? When he said this, he was a little emotional. His clean face had an expression of admiration and yearning. The number of genius disciples in Zhongzhou school was even greater, and he was only one of them. He knew that the number of geniuses in the world was innumerable. What kind of person could be called a true genius? Only time would tell. Countless geniuses of the past had faded into obscurity because they had been obstructed at a cultivation juncture. Such incidents had happened too many times in the cultivation world. Who were the true, peerless geniuses in the past few hundred years? Of course, it was the one who had walked the furthest. There had been only one ascendant in Chaotian over the last 1,000 years, and that was Jingyang. The more talented Xiang Wanshu was, the more he knew how great the immortal Jingyang was. Every time it was mentioned that Zhao Liu had inherited the legacy of Zhenren Jingyang, not to mention him, even his senior brother Tong Yin was a little envious. At this moment, the young monk from the Guoqing temple came to the old monk's side. He pointed at his mouth and whimpered, looking a little anxious. Some people found it strange, wondering if he was a mute. The practitioners who were familiar with the Guoqing temple had already guessed that the young monk was practicing silent meditation. The young monk was asking, The two Aoyama fellow Taoists have already left. Do I still need to practice silent meditation? The old monk said, It's done. The young monk felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He looked at the red line in the sky that was about to disappear and said loudly. His voice was loud and clear, like the evening bell of an ancient temple, resounding through the cloud platform. You came in high spirits and return when your spirits are exhausted. You truly have the demeanor of an immortal. The demeanor of an immortal? I'm afraid it's the work of the devil Tao. The continent is about to welcome another disaster. Standing in Haizhou City, Shi Fengchun said expressionlessly as he watched the sword lights and magical treasures scatter in the sky. The subordinate didn't understand what he meant, thinking that they had caught an important figure of the Aoyama sect in the process of arresting the criminals that day, which was a great loss of face for the Pure Heaven Bureau. It was meaningless for the master to say such things. How could the populace think that the immortal masters of the Aoyama sect were demons? Shi Fengchun didn't explain. He said this because, in his opinion, Zhao Liu was very similar to a great figure in the cultivation world many years ago. That important figure had traveled around the world, and he advocated killing to stop the evildoers. The number of people killed by a sword was probably more than the number of people killed by Lin Sanyue. But in the end, that important figure fell into the demonic path and became the biggest disaster in the cultivation world. This was a real secret, and almost nobody in the cultivation world knew about it. Not many people in the Aoyama sect knew about it. Yet, he learned this secret from the former manager of the Pure Heaven Bureau by chance. He had made up his mind that he would use all the connections and resources he had accumulated in the first half of his life after returning to Zhaoga City, in order to obtain the opportunity to meet the emperor in the royal palace. If he could meet the emperor, he would find a way to make the emperor associate Zhao Liu with that evil person. Among the 9 peaks of Aoyama, Shanghai Peak was the coldest, Yunxing Peak was the most dangerous, Shima Peak was the loneliest, and Tingguang Peak was the highest. In the early spring, everything was recovering. The trees on Tingguang Peak were already green and green. Looking around, one could see a pleasant green scene, which was very pleasing to the eye. A tall figure stood by the cliff's edge, looking at the scenery, exuding a cold aura. I didn't expect he was still alive, and he came to you? He wasn't talking to a human being, but a white cat with long hair. White Ghost, one of the 4 principal guards, left Bihu Peak for some reason and came here today. There was a monument on the top of Tingguang Peak, carried by a stone tortoise. The stone tortoise was very big, with a circumference of 100 feet. White Ghost squatted on the head of the stone tortoise, looking small in comparison. He didn't pay attention to what the man said, licking his hair and washing his face, doing it very seriously. I brought the message. As for why you two pretend not to know each other, it's none of my business. White Ghost was very curious about many things. There was a proverb in Aoyama that referred to this matter. The problem was another proverb, which he remembered more clearly. Curiosity killed the cat. I didn't arrange this, but I knew about it and supported it. Aoyama cultivates the sword, so it's necessary to wield the sword. Liangwang Peak exists for this reason. The passion of a younger generation can't be cooled down because of us. I know what he's worried about, but I believe that every generation is stronger than the last. What master and he couldn't do, it doesn't mean that the kids nowadays can't do it. White Ghost didn't stop washing his face, but his line of sight passed through his front claws and fell on the figure. Looking at his back, it had a strong impulse. Should it try to launch a sneak attack? Just like that night, on Bihu Peak 2 years ago, the temptation was too strong. White Ghost gave up the idea in the end, because he knew he couldn't defeat the figure. This annoyed White Ghost. He stopped washing his face and scratched the head of the stone tortoise. As the principal guard of Aoyama, he was very powerful, and his sharp claws were many times more powerful than most flying swords. On the top of Bihu Peak, he scratched Jingjiu and sent him flying into the lake thousands of feet away, making him recuperate for half a year. He obviously didn't hold back his strength. So wouldn't the stone tortoise be smashed into powder? That didn't happen. The stone tortoise didn't shatter, nor did it crack. There was no trace, not even a white mark. An ancient and leisurely breath appeared on the top of the cliff. The stone tortoise slowly opened its eyes, looking a little confused, as if it didn't know what had happened. It turned out to be a living creature. The person turned around. He was tall, had calm eyes, and had an unfathomable breath. He was the principal of Aoyama. How did the round turtle offend you? It was sleeping soundly, but you had to wake it up. White ghost claws could split mountains and lakes, and made the well of Shinma Peak cough for half a year. But now he could only wake up the stone tortoise. But he wasn't embarrassed. As a companion who had lived in Aoyama for thousands of years, White Ghost certainly knew that the opponent had thick skin and wouldn't get hurt. Because the opponent was also the principal guard of Aoyama, the round turtle. You're not embarrassed, but I, the principal of Aoyama, don't even have a sword. Isn't it a little embarrassing? The principal looked at the stone tablet on the back of the stone tortoise and said, "He's coming back anyway. If you really want to stop this, you can use this to exchange." The stone tablet was very wide, straight, and huge, like a hill that had been cut open. Its surface was very smooth, and there were no words on it. There was a sword stuck on the top of the stone tablet, like a young girl with a small hairpin on her head. Was it the legendary sword of inherited heaven? But if one looked closely, he would find that the sword had no hilt, and it was hollow in the middle. The sword of inherited heaven was not a sword, but a scabbard. A scabbard was called the sword of inherited heaven. So what kind of sword did it contain? Chapter 91. The Path to the Heavens is about to be published. According to the usual practice, I should write a speech at this time, expressing my fear and anticipation, thanking the editor and everyone for their help, and then canvassing for votes or something. But everyone should be able to feel that the new book, The Path to the Heavens, I really want to change some of the conventions, or at least some of my habits. That's why I originally wanted to quietly publish it and let you guys pay for it without anyone noticing. In the end, I was criticized for not respecting the readers. I feel that I have always respected the readers. Although I often quarreled with the readers in the past and scolded each other, and I basically did not listen to the readers' suggestions, let alone pay attention to their criticism, I still feel that I respect the readers because I am really serious about writing books, and I have always insisted that I am worthy of everyone's subscription money. When I am working, my mental and other inputs are absolutely sufficient. You can say that my writing sucks, but that's a problem with my standards. But there is no problem with my attitude, except for some special moments. There are a lot of things around middle-aged men, so I won't go into detail. In any case, when I have the time and energy, I will seriously write. As for the words of gratitude, I want to keep them in my heart. I haven't done something like canvassing for votes for 2 to 3 years, so I'll just do it casually. I am not afraid of the results, because the writing is not bad. I am really looking forward to it. Please subscribe to the original version, my friends. I have been writing books for more than 10 years, and so many books have been published, but I still hold on to the original idea. Whether it is recommendation votes or monthly votes, they are all feelings. If you vote, I'll be very grateful. If you don't vote, I won't force you. Tips are completely unnecessary, but subscriptions, you really need to come. To be honest, I have long since passed the stage of relying on subscriptions to make a living, but I still value subscriptions very much. Why? Because subscriptions are the foundation of the development of web novels to this day. And also because developing the habit of subscribing to the original version is very helpful for more authors. Most importantly, I feel that this is something we should do. I won't say much else. I definitely won't promise to constantly update. The only promise I can make is that the path to the heavens will be very good. Finally, thank you sincerely. Chapter 92. The main sword of Tianguang Peak was the most powerful sword of the Aoyama sect. This sword had been lost a long time ago, and the so-called inherited heaven sword was only a sheath. Undoubtedly, this was the biggest secret of the Aoyama sect, and nobody knew about it except for the 9 Peak Masters. Zhao Liu still didn't know about it because she left too suddenly, or maybe on purpose. She didn't know many secrets of the Aoyama sect. The disciples of Aoyama didn't know about it either. The external disciples of the South Pine Pavilion and the North Crane sect were still concerned about when they could reach the state of spiritual stability and become an inner sect disciple. The sword-washing disciples by the stream were most concerned about which peak master would choose them for the upcoming inherited sword competition. The inherited sword disciples of the peaks were most concerned about the sword trial, which was held every few years, and what rank they would get, and whether they would be qualified to participate in the plum meeting. There were over 40 inner sect disciples participating in the inherited sword competition, of which a dozen disciples from the South Pine Pavilion received the most attention. Zhao Liu was from the South Pine Pavilion, and so was Lu Shisui. In less than 10 years, the South Pine Pavilion had produced 2 disciples with natural Tao quality, but the evaluation and treatment of these 2 disciples were completely different in the 9 peaks of Aoyama. When the name of Lu Shisui was mentioned, the disciples of Aoyama didn't show the same admiration as before, but rather disdain and disappointment. Sometimes they would show some sympathy, but most of the time they were angry. When the name of Zhao Liu was mentioned, they became more excited than ever, and their admiration for her grew even stronger. Yao Songzhan and Lin Yingliang had finally brought back the news of the master of Shinma Peak, who had been traveling for 2 years. It wasn't until now that the people of the 9 peaks of Aoyama knew where Zhao Liu had been and what she had done in the last 2 years. She had been killing demons and devils along the way. No matter which sect you were from, or the benefactor of the royal concubine, you would be killed as long as you committed an evil deed. Hearing these stories, the disciples of Aoyama couldn't help but feel proud and honored. What pleased the disciples of Aoyama the most was what had happened at the Four Seas banquet. The disciples of Aoyama didn't like the disciples of Western Sea Sword School because of their arrogance of the godly swordsman. In the eyes of the disciples of the Green Mountain, Zhao Liu had slapped the West Ocean Sword sect in the face by killing someone in the Grand Hall of the Four Seas banquet, which was quite satisfying. The news that Jing Jiao and the Center Sect had a duel at the Plum meeting had spread far and wide, but even the colleagues of the Green Mountain didn't think Jing Jiao would win. It was because his opponent might be Tong Yin of the Center Sect, the #1 chess player in the world. Some disciples who didn't know what had happened at the time felt discontented, thinking that the Green Mountain would be suppressed by the Center Sect if he were to lose to the other party. One afternoon, the sword-washing disciples finished half a day of homework and came to the stream to take a break. Taking advantage of the spring sun, they discussed something. With the inherited sword competition around the corner, the most popular topic among the disciples was naturally when Zhao Liu would come back and whether she would recruit disciples this time. Suddenly, a white cloud floated over from the blue sky. The atmosphere between heaven and earth changed slightly. Light and shadow intertwined on the peaks. The Aoyama formation opened up a passage. A flying sword rapidly flew over from the horizon, drawing a perfectly straight red line. There was a sudden silence by the stream, followed by an uproar. Mei Li, Lin Wuji, Gu Han, and the others came out of the Shi Jian pavilion upon hearing the noise. They looked up at the sky with different expressions. Someone yelled in surprise, "Big Sister Liu is back." "It's Senior Master Liu." A disciple corrected him. "The thoughtless sword is even redder. It looks like blood. What are you afraid of?" "The sword of Aoyama is bound to be stained with blood. Senior Master Liu has been slaying demons and devils along the way, so of course her sword is redder." As the blood-red sword light retreated to the peak top, the monkeys screamed in the forest among the cliffs, followed by the sound of friction. It seemed that the monkeys were on their way to meet their master. The monkeys were very enthusiastic about the return of their master, showing that they missed him very much. Jing Jiao felt a bit annoyed, thinking that these monkeys were becoming more and more like his relatives on Shirua Peak. Zhao Liu went to the manor cave to take a bath and change clothes. The first thing Jing Jiao did was to bring out the bamboo chair and lie on it. Without this chair, he had less time to sleep over the last 2 years. Besides the bamboo chair, he also forgot to bring a ceramic plate with him, which he took out now. Zhao Lei walked out of the manor cave while wiping her wet hair. She saw Jing Jiu lying on the chair, holding a grain of sand in his hand and staring at the ceramic plate in a daze. She hadn't seen this scene for a long time. A hint of a smile flashed in her eyes. The grains of sand on the ceramic plate had covered nearly half of the surface of the plate. She remembered clearly that when they were by the cliff of sword washing, it should have been 1/3 of the plate. Judging from the time, what Jing Jiu was doing should be more and more difficult as the game progressed. It was because of the ceramic plate and the grains of sand that she believed that playing chess was the easiest thing in the world for Jing Jiu. Even Tong Yin was no match for him. As she was thinking of this, hurried footsteps could be heard in the cliffs. Gu Qing came to the peak top as quickly as he could. He didn't have the time to bow to Jing Jiu. "The plum meeting?" he asked while looking at Jing Jiu. Jing Jiu uttered The expression on Gu Qing's face changed slightly as he asked again, "Tong Yin?" "If he goes," Zhao Lei said. Standing by the cliff's edge, Gu Qing thought about it seriously for a while, and then said to Jing Jiu, "You have to win." Influenced by Jing Jiu talked less and less, but for some reason, those monkeys in the peaks didn't change at all. Jing Jiu turned to Zhao Lei and said, "Look, his state of mind is indeed peaceful, stronger than yours and Lu Shisui's." Hearing Jing Jiu praising him for being stronger than Zhao Lei, Gu Qing felt a bit uncomfortable. Thinking of Lu Shisui mentioned by Jing Jiu, he said seriously, "He's having a hard time now. I went to see him once, but he didn't want to see me again. I think there's something wrong with his state of mind. You should go and have a look." Jing Jiu didn't respond. Zhao Lei asked, "Are you sure he'll be fine?" Jing Jiu dropped the grain of sand between his fingers, saying, "I'm sure it's his own choice." The inherited sword competition began on the 4th day after the two of them returned to Aoyama. The arrangement at the end of the stream of sword washing was the same as 3 years ago. It was probably because all the cultivation sects were preparing for the plum meeting that fewer guests came to watch the competition. No one from Guoqing Temple or Ozawa came, and that young girl from the Platonist sect didn't come either. The strange thing was that the Windy Broadsword sect, which didn't have a close relationship with the Aoyama sect, sent another messenger to the competition. The appearance of Zhao Lei and Jing Jiu attracted a lot of attention. They had participated in the inherited sword competition 3 years ago, but they were by the stream then, and they were on the cliff this day. They were the disciples who were going to inherit the sword at that time, and now they were going to choose the disciples who would inherit the sword. Speaking of the fast promotion of status, it was rare to see such a situation in the last tens of thousands of years in Aoyama. This, of course, had something to do with the ascension of the immortal Jingyang. Looking at Zhao Lei and Jing Jiu, many disciples of Aoyama, including the masters of the 2nd generation, couldn't help but feel envious or even jealous of them. But they were well aware that they didn't have the courage that Zhao Lei had 3 years ago, and they didn't have the ability to climb to the top of the Shima Peak. As such, their jealousy and resentment were all directed at Jing Jiu. Apart from a few people, no one knew what had happened that night. Jing Jiu didn't have any dealings with anybody, so he didn't have a chance to explain, and he was happy to see it happen. Zhao Lei understood his intention, so she didn't say anything. Like Jing Jiu, she didn't see anybody. A disciple by the stream suddenly said, "Look, is he still carrying that iron sword on his back?" "It's the sword left by Senior Master Emo. It's wide and straight. I can't be wrong." Chapter 93. For the swordsmen of Aoyama, the state of the undefeated was the most important hurdle. Once they entered the state, they would have a lifespan several times longer than that of mortals, and they would be able to conceal their own energy with down magic. More importantly, their flying swords could be hidden in the sword pill, and when needed, they could come out with the discernment sword and kill people invisibly as fast as lightning. Back then, Master Mo and Master Lu were sent to the South Pine Pavilion to teach the external disciples because they couldn't enter the state of the undefeated and couldn't see a future in cultivation. It was not until they brought out Zhao Liu, Lu Shui, and Jing Jiu that they were specially summoned back to the peak to receive the magic medicine and continue to strive for a higher state. Jing Jiu, carrying the iron sword on his back, meant that he hadn't entered the state of the undefeated. At his age, this was a normal thing. The problem was that his performance at the inherited sword competition 3 years ago shocked many people, so they naturally thought that he should have made a breakthrough after traveling for 3 years. Of course, this expectation was inevitably related to jealousy or envy. There are many precocious people who cultivate very fast at the beginning, but as their Dao magic becomes more and more difficult, their progress gradually slows down or even stops. Looking at the cliff, Shui Yong said with a sneer, "No progress in 3 years. I think he is this kind of person." After 3 years, Shui Yong had completed the state of perfect preservation, and with the help of the granduncle of Shuriwei Peak, he entered the state of inherited will. He knew that he would be selected by Liangwang Peak and be taught the real sword, so he would catch up with or even surpass Jingjiu in the future. These were the thoughts of the ordinary disciples, but more people didn't think so. Most of the disciples at this age were below the state of inherited will, so there was no other explanation than jealousy for Jingjiu to have such a high requirement. The scene of Jingjiu defeating Gu Qing at the inherited sword competition 3 years ago was still vivid in people's minds. The sword way was based on the state, but it couldn't be completely relied on. Since entering the inner sect from the South Pine Pavilion, Jingjiu had brought too many surprises to Aoyama, so no one dared to make a rash judgment. Those people were more curious about why he showed up here. It was well known that he had never left Shima Peak when he was on Green Mountain. Lin Wuji looked at him in surprise and asked, "You're not in a daze on the peak, but you're here to watch the fun?" Jingjiu said, "I also want to accept disciples." He had only inherited the sword for 3 years, and now he wanted to accept a disciple? Lin Wuji felt that his words were ridiculous. He was about to laugh when he suddenly remembered that Jingjiu was now the second-generation teacher of Shima Peak. Of course, he was qualified to accept disciples. But why did he still feel that it was ridiculous? The inherited will realm can also accept disciples, he asked uncertainly. Jingjiu said with certainty, "If the sect rules haven't been changed, then yes." The inherited sword competition began. The young disciples who had practiced hard by the stream of sword washing for 3 years came to the green stones in the stream according to the order on the registration list to show their swordsmanship. This year's inherited sword competition was the same as the previous years. It was also a stage for choosing and being chosen. Many things had been decided privately before the competition started. People in the peaks were whispering in small notebooks, and those disciples who were going to participate in the competition were looking at the cliff with expectant eyes, hoping to hear their names being called. Liangwang Peak and Tianguang Peak were still the places that the disciples wanted to go to the most. To his surprise, a few eager gazes came from a secluded corner of the cliff. Zhao Liu and Jingjiu were sitting there. They had just returned to Aoyama, so they had no time to contact the young disciples by the stream in advance. They didn't know where the enthusiasm of these young disciples came from. To the disappointment of those disciples, no voice came from that remote and quiet corner. After all, they didn't have the chance to become the inherited sword disciple of Shinma Peak. But they also felt relieved. What if it was Jingjiu who spoke? Were they going to become his disciple? A figure was reflected on the surface of the stream. The two sides of the valley, which had been quiet for 3 years, suddenly came the cries of monkeys again. The disciples of Aoyama were surprised and puzzled. Only Jingjiu knew that the monkeys came to cheer for their neighbors. It was Gu Qing who came to the stream. 3 years had passed. He had become a real young man. He looked calm and composed, with a calmness that didn't match his age. Looking at the figure in the stream, the cliffs suddenly became quiet. After a while, people began to discuss in low voices. Many people didn't forget what had happened 3 years ago. Gu Qing was defeated by Jingjiu. Later, he was expelled from Liangwang Peak for secretly learning the sword art. No one expected that he didn't waste 3 years by the stream, nor did he want to return to Liangwang Peak. Instead, he went directly to Shima Peak. After that, he rarely showed up, as if he had disappeared. No one knew what Gu Qing had done during the 3 years in Shima Peak. People could only be sure that he had completely fallen out with Liangwang Peak, or more precisely, with his elder brother Guhan. In the eyes of many disciples, Gu Qing's choice was very unwise. Not to mention Liangwang Peak, the Gu family had a lot of resources among the 9 peaks. Even if you were a son of a concubine who had been bullied, and even if you had to stay in the stream of sword washing for another 3 years, why did you have to fall out with him? However, no one thought that Gu Qing couldn't pass the inherited sword art. He had already reached the state of inherited will 3 years ago. Even if he didn't make any progress in the past 3 years and was forbidden to use the 6 dragon sword spell, his state and strength must be far beyond those sword-washing disciples by the stream. People even guessed that he would choose Shima Peak, but they didn't know how Liangwang Peak and senior brother Guhan would react. Everyone knew the real reason why Gu Qing was expelled from Liangwang Peak, and they also knew that the relationship between Jing Jiao and Guhan was terrible. Many people subconsciously looked at the cliff where the disciples of Liangwang Peak were. Guhan stood under a tree with an indifferent expression, and no one could tell what he was thinking. Shuiyong, he also looked at that place. Under the cover of many people's gazes, no one noticed that he and Guhan looked at each other at a certain moment. Shuiyong, he understood what Guhan meant. He took a deep breath and walked to the blue stone in the stream. Shuiyong, he didn't have the confidence to defeat Gu Qing. He was at the inherited will realm, but Guhan had already reached the inherited will realm 3 years ago. But he believed that he could deal with Guhan and show his progress to the masters in the cliff. At the same time, he could prove that Gu Qing's state of cultivation had stagnated in the past 3 years. Moreover, he had hidden skills. If Gu Qing underestimated him, he might really win. Wouldn't he be in the limelight today? Shuiyong, he called out his flying sword, stared at Gu Qing across the stream, and said, "Please." As soon as he finished speaking, the flying sword pierced through the air, leaving a residual shadow behind, and headed straight for Gu Qing's face. He had prepared himself for what he would do if Gu Qing dodged with his sword or counterattacked with his sword. But none of the things he had imagined happened. A crisp sound resounded through the mountain stream. Shuiyong, Yi's flying sword fell heavily into the stream like a stone, splashing water. Gu Qing raised the sword in his hand and checked it. He was relieved to make sure that the sword was not damaged. It was quiet on the cliff. The stream kept flowing, washing Shuiyong, Yi's sword. For some reason, many people felt this scene was familiar. Lin Wuji also felt it was familiar. The disciples of Liangwang Peak were the most sensitive to this scene. Chapter 94. How could this be possible? Shuiyong, he stood in the stream with his hands empty, shocked, speechless. He didn't expect to defeat Gu Qing easily, but in his imagination, this sword fight would be very intense and exciting, and the winner would not be determined until the end. Even if he lost, it would be an honorable defeat, and he would be envied by his peers at the Hall of Sword Washing and praised by his masters. Who could have imagined such an ending? Gu Qing didn't take the opportunity to attack him. He stood by the stream in silence with his sword in his hand. Shuiyong, he finally came to his senses. He felt his face burning. The strong sense of humiliation made him forget the story that had happened 3 years ago. He let out a shout. The flying sword in the stream suddenly flew up again. The stream water turned into white mist instantly, and a dozen flames ignited on the body of the sword. The burning flying sword hacked toward Gu Qing with a scorching heat wave. The 6 dragon sword style. Shuiyong, Yi's granduncle, was an elder of Shuriwa Peak, and he had learned this sword style secretly. Though his 6 dragon sword style wasn't as powerful as Gu Qing's 3 years ago, how could Gu Qing deal with it when he couldn't use the real swords of the peaks? No one noticed that Gu Qing's left hand had already landed on the hilt of his sword. The burning sword was coming. Gu Qing bent his left knee slightly, turned his body slightly, tightened his chest and abdomen, and struck the sword in the air with all his might. The method he used wasn't hacking, stabbing, or cutting. It was waving. His sword hit Shui Yong, Yi's flying sword accurately. It was a loud bang. Shui Yong, Yi's flying sword landed in the wild forest of the valley a few thousand feet away, leaving a long fiery tail behind. A few flames sprang up in the wild forest, but they were extinguished for some reason. Countless surprise screams rang out by the stream. Gu turned around and left. Everyone remembered why the scene looked so familiar. The same scene had happened here 3 years ago. Looking at the remote corner on the cliff, Lin Wuji shook his head with a smile. He thought it was Jing Jiu's arrangement, but he didn't know it was Gu Qing's own decision. Pick yourself up from where you fell. How to fall, how to climb up. The cheerful cries of the monkeys rang out in the valley. It turned out that they were the ones who put out the fire in the forest, and now they were fighting over the swords. Shui Yong, he stood in the stream. His face was pale, and he was in a daze. He didn't think about his sword at all, nor did he care about his failure. He finally came to his senses and remembered what had happened 3 years ago. He began to worry that he would lose the right to inherit a sword like Gu Qing because he secretly learned the sword art. No sound came from the cliff. It was common for the masters of the 9 peaks of Aoyama to pass the true sword to their favorite disciples in advance. No one would care about it. If Shanghai Peak and Tianguang Peak had not gone against each other 3 years ago, Gu Qing would not have been sacrificed. Shui Yong, he didn't dare to stand there anymore. He hurriedly retreated back to the stream. His whole body was soaked, but he didn't know whether it was the stream water or his cold sweat. Gu Qing stood in the stream. Hundreds of people looked at him from the cliff. Gu Qing, are you willing to learn the sword from me? A voice suddenly rang out. It was the Yunxing Peak master himself. What was more shocking was that Elder Bai Rujing of Tianguang Peak also stood out and wanted to take Gu Qing as his disciple. No one noticed that in a corner of the cliff, Jing Jiu's eyes became colder when Bai Rujing stood out. Gu Qing said without hesitation, "Your disciple is willing to inherit the sword from Shinma Peak." Countless eyes fell on that corner of the cliff, or more precisely, on Zhao Leu. Many people had guessed it, but they didn't expect Gu Qing would still insist on this choice, even though he was favored by 2 seniors in the Broken Sea State. Zhao Leu was 1 year younger than him. Everyone thought Gu Qing would become Zhao Leu's disciple in the next moment. But something unexpected happened. Jing Jiu said, "Let me do it." Zhao Leu said, "Okay." Jing Jiu walked to the edge of the cliff and said, "Are you willing to learn the sword from me?" Hearing this, there was an uproar in the cliff. If it were Zhao Leu who took Gu Qing as her disciple, it would be fine because she was already in the state of the undefeated. More importantly, she was the master of Shinma Peak. Jing Jiu's talent in swordsmanship was naturally very high, but he didn't make any progress in the past 3 years, and he was still in the state of inherited will. He was even worse than Gu Qing 3 years ago. How could Gu Qing be willing to take him as his teacher? As people were thinking about this, they heard Gu Qing's answer. "I'm willing." Gu Qing's expression was calm, without any reluctance. It was quiet all around. The inherited sword competition continued. The disciples all performed very well, especially the young Yuan from Lelong Commandery. He was usually very low-key, but today he surprised everyone. Not until then did the masters know that he had entered the state of inherited will in advance, which caused a lot of discussion and competition. Even Lianwang Peak expressed interest in him. Zhao Leu looked at Jing Jiu and said, "Is he the one?" Jing Jiu nodded. 3 years ago, young Yuan asked Gu Qing if Shinma Peak wanted to take in an inherited sword disciple. Zhao Leu walked to the edge of the cliff. The coral in the cliff suddenly disappeared. A happy smile appeared on young Yuan's face. Suddenly, a sobbing sound came from the stream. The disciples looked over and found it was junior sister Yushan. Seeing the tears on the girl's face, her peers felt sorry for her and comforted her. "What's wrong?" Junior sister Yushan shook her head and wiped her tears with her sleeve. She forced a smile and said, "Nothing." Looking at her slightly red nose, the disciples were very confused, thinking to themselves, how is this fine? What exactly is going on? Some people looked at the young Yuan standing on the cliff and thought he had guessed something, so they smiled without saying anything. They didn't know that junior sister Yushan was not sad because of this. She was sad because senior brother Gu and senior brother Yuan had become the inherited sword disciples of Shenma Peak. Then, Shenma Peak was full. Shenma Peak only had Zhao Liu and Jingjiu, so it could only taken 2 inherited sword disciples. But she hadn't shown up yet. What should she do? Should she wait in the stream of sword washing for another 3 years? Now was her turn. Holding the sword, she walked to the green stone in the stream and saluted to the masters in the cliff. When her sight fell on that corner, she couldn't help but sniff again. That corner looked so pitiful and cute. Although she was not in the right mood, Yushan's performance was very outstanding. Her realm was not extraordinary, but what was extraordinary was the absolute control she revealed when she controlled and flew the sword. Even the smallest details were done perfectly. Her precision could even be said to be perfect. Seeing the tear stains on the young girl's face, Meili felt both pity and joy. She walked to the cliff's edge and said, "Come to Qingrong Peak." Qingrong Peak was mostly filled with female disciples, so it was the best place for junior sister Yushan. Unexpectedly, junior sister Yushan didn't agree directly, but looked at that corner on the cliff instead. In the shadow of the tree, Jingjiu shook his head imperceptibly. Yushan was taken aback. She looked at Senior Master Mei Li again and shook her head apologetically. There was another uproar in the cliff. Jingjiu said to young Yuan, "Tell her to choose Shangda Peak." Gu Qing didn't understand, wondering how he could be sure that Shangda Peak would choose junior sister Yushan. Shangda Peak was extremely cold and gloomy, and there hadn't been a female disciple there for many years because of the sword jail and the temperament of the peak. Young Yuan returned to the stream's edge and said something to junior sister Yushan in a low voice. It was then that Qi Yin of Shangda Peak came out and asked, "Are you willing to learn the sword work with me?" Junior sister Yushan nodded after a moment of hesitation. Meili was quite annoyed, and she turned around and glared at Jingjiu. Like Senior Master Mei Li, the female disciples of Qingrong Peak had a good impression of Jingjiu, but they were also angry at the moment. Everyone could tell that junior sister Yushan had chosen Shangda Peak according to Jingjiu's suggestion, though they didn't understand why she listened to Jingjiu. Jingjiu didn't pay attention to these gazes. He looked at the cliff in silence. That guy was nowhere to be found, no matter where the disciples of Liangwang Peak or Tianguang Peak were. Chapter 95. In the evening, the sword-washing stream reflected the sunset glow, looking like a red ribbon. It was quite lively among the cliffs. The monkeys had already returned Shui Yong, Yi's sword, so they weren't the ones making a fuss. Many disciples were packing their luggage, and they would go to the 9 peaks later to start a new life. In a cozy stone cave, young Yuan couldn't help but sigh after packing his luggage and glancing at young sister Yushan, who was still unhappy. "You should listen to the masters when you go to Shangda Peak. Don't throw a tantrum. I don't want to go there," young sister Yushan said with a wronged expression. Then she thought of the rumors, feeling a bit scared, asking, "Is Senior Master Sword Justice really that formidable?" Young Yuan comforted her. "Big Brother Jing won't let you suffer a loss if he asks you to go there." "That's true." Young sister Yushan thought of something and said, "You should call him Senior Master Jing. Don't always forget it." Young Yuan said, "I know." From the South Pine Pavilion to the sword-washing stream, the two of them had been instructed by Jingjiu a few times. Jingjiu's identity had changed from young brother Jing to big brother Jing, and now he was Senior Master Jing. Young sister Yushan was not happy that she couldn't go to Shenma Peak, but she was happy that Jingjiu had instructed her in the end. "Can I go there?" she asked. Young Yuan knew what she meant, but he didn't dare agree directly, saying, "I have to ask my master first." The Shenma Peak under the setting sun looked like a burning sword. Standing by the cliff's edge, Jingjiu looked at the distant Shangda Peak, lost in thought. He had often looked at that place before he left Aoyama. Zhao Liu came to his side and asked, "Why don't you let her go to Qingrong Peak?" Jingzhou didn't answer her, thinking it was inappropriate to tell others the reason for his conflict with Qingrong Peak. Zhao Liu asked again, "Why don't you take Young Yuan as your disciple?" Jingzhou said, "I've never accepted a disciple, but I heard that I have to beat him hard. For some reason, I can't do it." So, he asked Zhao Liu to come forward just to make it easier for Young Yuan to be beaten. Young Yuan heard this as soon as he arrived at the peak. He stared at Jingzhou, wondering what he had done wrong. The monkeys were making a lot of noise in the forest. Then they brought Gu Qing up. Young Yuan repeated junior sister Yushan's words. Gu Qing said with a smile, "Of course. I've lived here for 3 years, and no one cared." Young Yuan was at a loss, thinking, "Do we have the final say in this matter?" Gu Qing thought to himself, "You'll know in the future. Speaking of which, what's your name?" Hearing this question, even Zhao Liu was interested. To this day, people only knew that he was the youth surnamed Yuan from Lelong Commandery, but they didn't know his full name. Young Yuan answered honestly, "Yuan Qinhu." Gu Qing felt this name was familiar. He suddenly thought of something and said, "Senior Uncle Sword Justice's surname is also Yuan." Young Yuan was taken aback and said, "Yes, what a coincidence." Gu Qing said, "This name is similar to Senior Uncle Sword Justice's name, but the difference is too big. One was riding a whale, and the other was catching a tiger. Of course they were different." Young Yuan thought for a while and said to Zhao Liu, "May I ask for a name for my master?" It was common for a disciple to be given a name by a master in the Aoyama sect and other sections. Gu Qing said, "How about Yuan Pohei?" Using the state of Broken Sea as a name was indeed impressive, but also a bit. Zhao Liu glanced at him and said, "How about Yuan Tongtian?" Gu Qing knew he was too happy today and talked too much. He patted young Yuan's shoulder and signaled him to follow him to the small building outside the cliff cave. They would live here from now on, and the wooden hut at the foot of the cliff would be left to the monkeys. "How about you give him a name?" Zhao Liu said to Jingzhou. Before returning to Aoyama, Jingzhou and Zhao Liu went to the small village. She learned some stories that had happened that year, and also learned that it was he who gave the name to Lu Shui. Jingzhou shook his head. The inherited sword competition was soon forgotten because Aoyama was going to host a truly grand event this year. The sword trial of Aoyama was nominally to select the best young disciples to participate in the plum meeting next year, but it was actually a competition among the peaks. Aoyama always encouraged this kind of competition. Even if the disciples failed in the sword trial, they would still have the opportunity to enter Liangwang Peak as long as they performed well. They could choose any of the sword styles of the 9 peaks to practice. This was a rare opportunity for the young disciples, so they all signed up for it. Looking at the sword lights falling down toward Tianguang Peak from the distant sky, young Yuan showed an envious expression. He had just become a disciple of Shinma Peak, so he wasn't qualified to participate in the sword trial of Aoyama. It would take at least a few more years. "Do you really want to go?" asked Gu Qing while looking at him. Young Yuan said, "I don't dare to think about the plum meeting, but it would be great if I could enter Liangwang Peak to learn those sword styles." "Have you forgotten the relationship between us and Liangwang Peak?" asked Gu Qing. Young Yuan suddenly realized that he had witnessed the conflict between Jingzhou and Gu Han at the stream of sword washing. "Of course I won't go," he said hurriedly. Gu Qing said, "Believe me, Shinma Peak is your best choice. What Liangwang Peak can be found here?" Young Yuan didn't quite understand what Jingzhou meant, wondering if the big brothers and sisters of Liangwang Peak could learn any sword style of the 9 peaks at will. Could it be the same in Shinma Peak? An object drifted out of the cave and slowly drifted to the front of young Yuan. He caught it reflexively and found it to be a thin booklet. "Congratulations," said Gu Qing with a smile while looking at him. Young Yuan was confused. He opened the thin booklet and was startled by what he saw. There were 8 words written on the first page of the booklet. "Standing proudly in the snow and frost, 7 Apricot, is invincible. Both Gu Qing and Yang Yuan were famous people, so they knew what it was. It was the unreal sword style of Shilai Peak of 7 Apricot. Yang Yuan was shocked, thinking that this sword style could subdue the snow-flowing sword style of Shangda Peak. His face turned even paler. Gu Qing knew that he was overthinking, saying, "Masters don't have such a deep meaning in their actions." Yang Yuan asked nervously, "Then why teach me this sword style?" "Who knows? Maybe he just wants to make sure you won't be bullied too badly by Sister Yushan in the future." While the two were talking, a red light suddenly illuminated the top of the peak, overshadowing all the sunglow in the sky. A sword light left the peak and flew into the distance with a sudden gust of wind. The sword test of Aoyama was about to begin. Jing Jiao and Zhao Liu would go to Tianguang Peak. Seeing the blood-red line left by the thoughtless sword in the sky, Gu Qing suddenly had a bad feeling about what was going to happen. He prayed silently, hoping that nothing serious would happen today. Naming is indeed difficult. Everyone knows my name is terrible, but my chapter name is as good as ever. Chapter 96. The location of the sword trials in Aoyama was Tianguang Peak, or more accurately, the Sword Forest. The Sword Forest was a stone forest, and it was formed by hundreds of stone pillars. These stone pillars were about 10 feet thick, but they were more than 1,000 feet tall. They were like countless giant swords pointing towards the sky, and it looked exceptionally magnificent. Many of the disciples who participated in the sword trial of Aoyama for the first time also saw the stone forest from such a close distance. They were shocked, but they were nervous when they thought about how they would have to stand on top of the stone pillars and compete with their peers. Different from the inherited sword competition, the sword trial of Aoyama was more like a real battle, which was much more dangerous. Every time, there would be many injured disciples, and many of them were seriously injured. It was said that many years ago, during the sword trial of Aoyama, some disciples even died on the spot. Due to these reasons and the fact that they did not want the outside world to know their true strength, Aoyama's sect had never invited other sects to attend their ceremonies, not even the sects like Guocheng Temple, Shuei Nunnery, and Ozawa, who had been friends for thousands of years. Hundreds of disciples came to the surroundings of the sword forest and did not make a single sound. A wide and straight black sword hung in the air above the stone platform in silence, emitting a bone-piercing chill in all directions. This was the main sword of Shangda Peak, the 3-foot sword. Today, Yuan Qijing would personally oversee the meeting. Thinking up to this point, the breathing of the disciples seemed to have frozen, and they didn't dare to make any noise. So. The sound of something tearing through the air kept ringing. Several beams of sword light illuminated the hundreds of stone pillars in the mountains, scattering countless rays of light. The 6 flying swords slowly descended and lined up behind the 3-foot sword. Some swords were simple and cold, some were sharp, and some were like thunder. 3-foot sword, absolute void sword, zither sword, returning sun sword, time sword, tide sword, and the thoughtless sword. Looking at this scene, the hundreds of disciples finally couldn't control themselves any longer, and they started discussing with excited expressions. The main swords of Aoyama's peaks, 7 out of 9. Such a scene had not appeared for many years. Countless gazes fell on those famous swords. The blood-red flying sword, which was ranked last, received the most attention and made many people sigh with emotion. Some of the white-haired elders even felt as if a lifetime had passed. Perfected Jingyang never participated in the affairs of the sect, so the thoughtless sword rarely appeared. The last time the thoughtless sword appeared on such an occasion, the leader of Aoyama's sect was still Taiping Jinren, and Yuan Qijing had just taken over as the leader of Shanghai Peak. How many years ago was that? There were 9 stone platforms between the cliffs opposite the sword forest. These 9 stone platforms were the seats for the elders of the 9 peaks. Only the second platform was occupied by the disciples of Liangwang Peak, led by Guo Nanshan. To show respect to the masters, the disciples of Liangwang Peak didn't have seats and would stand all the time. Many gazes landed on the ninth stone platform. Zhao Leu had arrived. No matter whether she greeted the peak masters or the elders as equals or received the greetings from the disciples, her expression was calm, showing no discomfort or awkwardness. The peak master of Qingrong thought that her temperament was much better than that of the regular disciples, similar to that of her young senior master. It seemed that she deserved it. As she looked at Jing Jiao by Zhao Leu's side, the expression in her eyes became complicated. Many elders also had complicated feelings about Jing Jiao, though their feelings were not the same as those of the peak master of Qingrong. In some people's eyes, Jing Jiao was still very young, so it was normal that he hadn't entered the state of the undefeated, but he was still a bit weaker than Zhao Leu and Zhuo Ruzhui, who was still behind closed doors. It was said that Zhuo Ruzhui had already entered the upper state of the undefeated, and it was very likely that he would have entered the state of free travel when he came out from behind closed doors, which would shock the whole land. But most elders of the Nine Peaks didn't think so. Jing Jiao had only fought once, and that was when he defeated Gu Qing at the inherited sword competition 3 years ago. It was that fight that convinced many elders that this young disciple was definitely a talented swordsman. At this year's inherited sword competition, the sword style Gu Qing used was obviously from Jing Jiao, which was why the peak master of Yunqing wanted to take Jing Jiao as his disciple. Until now, those elders had remained silent and hadn't made any comments on Jing Jiao because they didn't want to attract the attention of other sects, especially Zhongzhou school. They hoped that Jing Jiao would become the unexpected soldier of the Aoyama sect in the future. After knowing the agreement between Jing Jiao and Zhongzhou school at the Four Seas banquet, they looked forward to seeing how Jing Jiao would perform at next year's plum meeting. Couldn't he defeat Tong Yin on the Go board? They didn't care. Whether Jing Jiao could defeat his peers from Zhongzhou school was what they cared about. The arrangement of the matches at the sword trial was decided by drawing lots, until the final 10 winners would be selected to represent the Aoyama sect at next year's plum meeting. If one encountered a big brother of Liangwang Peak in the first round, it could only be said that one had bad luck. The competition of swordsmanship emphasized that everything in the world was contained in the sword, and luck was one of the factors. Nobody dared to cheat in the drawing of lots. Though the sword jail on the Shangda Peak locked up countless demons and devils, nobody knew how many empty rooms there were in the jail. Qi Yuanliang had bad luck. He had inherited the sword only 3 years ago, and he was ranked first in today's first sword trial of Aoyama. To make matters worse, his opponent was Yao Songshan. 2 flashes of sword light left the ground. Yao Songshan and Qi Yuanliang landed on 2 stone posts, facing each other with a distance of more than 1,000 feet. The top of the stone post was a few thousand feet above the ground, with clouds and fog shrouding the bottom. If it were an ordinary person, he would fall to his death with his legs weakened. Qi Yuanliang, of course, knew that he was no match for this 11th big brother of Liangwang Peak, but a disciple of Aoyama couldn't give up the fight. He forced himself to calm down and said bravely, "Please." Without any mishap, Yao Songshan won. Later, other disciples flew up to the sword forest one after another, starting the sword fights. Compared to the inherited sword competition, the sword trial of Aoyama was much more exciting and, of course, much more dangerous. The violent and dense sword lights traveled at a high speed among the stone posts, reaching into the clouds, scraping the stone chips off from time to time. Even with the protection of the formation, the disciples could still hear the ear-piercing sounds of the flying swords piercing through the air and sense the formidable sword wills. When the fights became more intense, the 2 sides would ride their swords away from the original stone posts, fighting on the swords. Thunder and lightning and flames would appear from time to time. The disciples stared at the high-speed sword lights and figures in the stone forest. They didn't want to miss anything. The masters of the peaks were also watching the disciples' fights with serious expressions, ready to rescue them at any time. In a sword fight like this, neither side could hold back. At the critical moment, It would be difficult to stop even if they wanted to. Jingjiu's eyes were not on the stone forest. He was looking at a mountain path in the distance. The mountain path was narrow, disappearing in the fog, leading to an unknown place. He knew that the residence of the disciples of Qingguang Peak was around the cliff. Lu Shui lived there. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.